Well, we're here, gamers. We're here and ready to draw. Let's get to it. Episode.
Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome.
I think my mouse is running out of battery.
The outcome of the First Samnite War had been
Oh, not my problem.
inconclusive. Yes, the Romans had gotten the better of it in battle, but nothing resembling a definitive conclusion was reached. The Samnites seemed content to consolidate their gains and not press the issue, and the Romans were disinclined to take the fight to the next level. They had done right by their allies and driven the Samnites out of Campania. They had no interest for now in invading Samnium and trying to conquer a strong-willed, capable, and well-supplied army. Plus, the winds of discontent were blowing in from Latium, and the Romans knew full well that if they got entangled with the Samnites, the Latin communities would be in a strong position to leverage concessions from the Romans. So a treaty of peace was concluded between the Romans and Samnites. The Latins saw this as a tacit admission
Hello, I
of
just
weakness,
baked brown sugar
and,
cookies. Who wants
seeking
some?
a more
Brother,
personally
send me some.
beneficial arrangement with the Romans, decided
made
to
it here.
strike while the iron was hot. But before any sort
You
of
gotta do
conflict with the Latins
everything.
were joined, a further step was
Wild,
taken
did
in
you
the
happen to get
Plebeian,
my
thanks to John for
recent
correcting my
email about
pronunciation,
me
quest for
accidentally?
greater
Oh,
share in
there it
power.
is.
In 342 BC,
Action shot
not
with
long
him
after the
shooting his
mutiny
big
of the
fuck off
garrison
revolver.
soldiers in
That's
Campania,
it. Gotcha.
the plebes pushed through
Alright.
another set of reforms
Don't worry about that
that
shit.
solidified their power. The package
Alright,
included
that
the
was
important
sick
provision
character to
that one
start
of the
with.
consuls for each year not just could be a plebe, but had to be a plebe. But more importantly, it set the well-known and oft-cited requirement that 10 years must pass before a man could hold the same office twice. The move was designed, obviously, to prevent one man from gaining too much power.
Obviously.
But at times the cure was worse than the disease, especially, for example, during the Second Punic War, when it became nearly impossible to run the war when the leadership kept changing. So though the 10-year requirement was followed and disregarded according to circumstance, it did set a cultural precedent strong enough that when, between 104 and 100 BC, Gaius Marius was elected consul 5 times in a row, it was a scandal that engendered enough ill will that the social fabric of the state began to unravel. But that is for a much later date, probably sometime early next year at the pace we're going.
Hurry up.
When the Romans
history of
withdrew
Rome is
from
like-
fighting the Samnites,
You can boil
the
it down in 5
Campanians and
minutes, easy.
Latins both wanted to carry on with the fight. As I mentioned last week, the Samnites implored the Romans to put a stop to the aggression, but the Romans refused to order the Latins to do anything one way or the other. The Latins immediately took this to mean that if Rome did not feel strong enough to enforce its will, politics being the zero-sum game that it is, then that meant the Latins must be stronger than their supposed masters. They resolved to use this to their advantage. A delegation representing the Latin League was sent to Rome to demand a political reordering. Up to this point, the Latins had enjoyed varying degrees of Roman citizenship, usually trade and intermarriage rights, stopping short of full suffrage.
Thermo. What's up,
The
Thermo?
delegation asked of the Romans not
Haha,
just
yeah,
full
I
suffrage,
switched.
but also
you thought you got
audaciously
so
demanded that
excited.
one of the 2 yearly consuls come from the Latin communities.
I'm gonna make you
The
wait
Romans
for
were
an hour
shocked
before I do
and
your silly
practically
little
laughed
die.
the delegation out of the Senate. No Roman was going to submit himself to the rule of a mere Latin.
As we
The
all know,
plebes had
Rome
just
was built in a
guaranteed
day.
their own consulship and weren't about to give it up, while the patricians had just given up one of their consulships and weren't about to let go of the other. On the question of a Latin consul, the two classes were united. The Senate's, and I'm paraphrasing here, answer to the Latin delegation was, no, there will be no political reordering. We like things just the way they are, thank you very much. Do you not remember that we wiped the floor with you at Lake Regillus, and that's why things are the way they are? If you really want what you're asking for, then come take it, if you can.
No,
The Senate then immediately voted for war to teach the impertinent Latins a lesson. Legions were raised and sent out to meet the Latin force that had been massing in anticipation of the Senate's rejection of Latin demands. The consuls for that year were Titus Manlius Torquatus and our old
Titus
friend and
Manlius
hero
is
of the
back.
First Samnite War, Publius Decius, he of the grass crown.
you know, we might
On
have
a brief
accidentally skipped an
tangent,
episode,
the
but
Romans dated the past by reference to the consuls
Doesn't
for a
matter.
given year, rather than by an arbitrary numbering system. So that, for example, last week's battles with the Samnites were said to have taken place in the consulship of Corvus and Cossus, rather than in, say, 167, dating from the founding of the Republic, or
It is
409,
windy out
dating
there
from
for
the founding of
gamers.
the
It's
city.
like another 10
It
degrees.
seems a bit
super
unwieldy to
warm.
us, but the
That's
Romans liked it
Celsius.
just fine. Down the road, this system of reference would lead to the Roman joke that events occurring in the year of Julius Caesar's consulship, 59 BC, took place not in the consulship of Caesar and Bibulus, but in the consulship of Julius and Caesar. Get it? The Romans
No.
could be a laugh riot when the mood struck. Anyway, in the consulship of Decius and Manlius, 340 BC by our reckoning, war with the Latins began.
Rocks.
In the beginning, the outcome was very much in doubt. It had been years since the
Doing
Romans
great.
had fought an enemy that
What
so
about,
evenly
what about you,
matched
Astra?
them.
Blah.
It was almost like facing a mirror. The Romans and Latin forces were nearly identical in size. They used all the same tactics, spoke
You
the same
sure?
language,
You should.
prayed to
Get
the
those
same
sprite
gods,
sheets.
and in most cases knew each other personally.
You brought your rocks.
There would not be any surprises
Tree
or
agate and
innovative tactics,
Botswana agate.
just a standard straight-ahead infantry battle and victory to the
see.
strongest or luckiest. Both sides knew it and knew heavy
Oh,
casualties
you know what? I think I
loomed
might have a
as
couple.
force
Well, okay,
pitted
my brother
itself
has a couple of
against
pieces
force.
of that. So pretty.
Two legends emerged from the war.
Lilac.
One revealing how the Romans were able to win a fight that seemed destined to produce a draw, the second hammering home the idea that obeying consular authority is paramount
Me
and the
when I
only
put
way
the
to
rocks in my
maintain the
mouth.
critical discipline required for Rome to defeat its enemies. The first legend states that after the legions had built their camp near the Latin force and settled in for the night, both consuls had the same dream. In it, an apparition revealed that in the coming battle, the victorious side would sacrifice its commander, while the losing side would sacrifice its whole army. When they awoke, the two conferred and realized that they had had the same dream. They made a pact that each would lead one flank of the army, and whichever side began to fail first, that consul would charge into the enemy and seek death, so the gods would grant their whole army victory.
Okay.
The second legend states that the consul Manlius had given orders to his troops that no one should engage the Latins until he had given the okay. He wanted the battle to start at the time and place of his choosing, and didn't want reckless brawling to spark a battle he wasn't prepared for. Manlius' son Titus, however, disobeyed the order while leading a cavalry detachment on patrol. They encountered a group of Latins, and Titus was challenged to single combat by one of them. Titus demurred, understanding his orders, but the Latins called him a coward and all sorts of other nasty names.
Coward no balls.
His hackles raised, Titus accepted.
Oh,
and
you
proceeded
said
to
coward
kill
no
his
balls. I
challenger.
gotta do it.
Returning to camp with the spoils taken from his dead enemy, Titus was greeted by cheers. But the festive atmosphere died under the withering stare of his father, who ordered his son arrested. Manlius gave a brief speech in which he defended what he was about to do. His family, he said, would be torn apart by the punishment he was about to hand down,
Oh, that's fine.
but that was far better than having the entire state torn apart by disobedience to consular authority.
It's fine.
Then, without compassion and to the horror of his men, Manlius ordered his own son flogged and beheaded. Titus was given a hero's burial, and the army, from that point on, hated their commander.
This
But
guy
it was, to
sucks.
Manlius' credit, a far more disciplined and professional army that was doing the hating than before. There is nothing new about either of these legends, and they are both
Fried
retreads
rice.
of previous stories. Those of you who know Greek history will recognize the familiar elements of King Leonidas' vision that Sparta must
Some
either
of them
lose
look
a
so
king
good.
or its freedom to the Persians, which led him to make his suicidal last stand at Thermopylae to save his city. And those of you who have followed this podcast will note that Manlius' decision to execute his own
Thermopylae.
son
Oh,
follows
shit.
closely the story of
Guys,
the
is it
consul
Sparta?
Brutus and his treasonous
Holy
sons from the
fucking
early days
shit.
of the Republic. Roman annalists were enamored with the idea that Romans of the past displayed a dedication to the state that had fallen out of fashion and needed to be rekindled. To the later Romans, just as it is today and in most other times and places, the past became bathed in the golden light of simple nobility and selfless virtue,
Golden Light
whether
mentioned.
or not any such thing was true. Legends aside, there was a battle, and it did take place, near the base of Mount Vesuvius. Yes, that Mount Vesuvius. The Latins and Romans lined up for battle, and the fight was joined, with Decius leading the left flank and Manlius leading the right. The fighting was intense and evenly matched, but soon the Roman left began to buckle under the weight of the Latin advance. Supposedly, Decius, knowing what he must do, donned a ceremonial purple-tinged toga and veiled his face. Then, fully armed, he mounted his horse and charged into the opposing line. The Latins were at first terrified at the appearance of this mad, masked horseman, and Decius killed not an insignificant number before he was finally taken down by a shower of spears. Manlius, watching his colleague fall, knew that victory was within his grasp.
Roman
he held
death
back
cult,
a reserve
Roman
of
death
veteran
cult.
soldiers,
Yeah.
and, when the Latins were worn down, Manlius sent in the fresh troops and the Latins broke. Returning to Rome, it is said that Manlius was greeted with acclaim by the older men, but shunned by the young, who hated him for executing Titus, a well-liked young noble. And whether it was Decius's sacrifice or Manlius's tactics, the Latins were beaten. Over the course of the next year and a half, the Romans pursued a policy of laying siege to each of the Latin cities one by one, dividing them so none could offer aid to any of the others. It was during this stage of the war that the Samnites provided auxiliary forces to the Roman effort, joining the two enemies briefly under the same banner. It was in both of their interests to put down the rising Latins before the Roman-Samnite battle for Italian supremacy really got going. No sense
Purple
in having
toga,
some
he means
third-party
business. Seems like a
wild
good
card in
waste
the
of
mix.
purple.
They both agreed on that. Some of the Latin cities surrendered at the sight of the Roman army. Some resisted a little and then gave up,
But
and some fought to
pretty
the bitter
hardcore.
end. When it was over, Rome had subdued the entirety of Latium. At this point, the Latin League
those
was
little
abolished once and for
snails.
all, and
Their
any
spirits
independent
must
Latin
have
identity was
reinforced his
destroyed forever.
toga.
In the aftermath, the Senate gathered and decided the fate of each Latin tribe on a case-by-case basis. Those who gave up quickly or never joined the rebellion were given full Roman citizenship. Those who resisted some were allowed to keep intermarriage and trade rights, but denied the vote, while those who led the revolt were turned off their land and their holdings were colonized by Roman citizens. This treatment of the Latins was typical of Roman official policy. Anyone who was predisposed to friendship and did not resist Roman rule was welcomed openly into the empire and given an array of rights and privileges, while those predisposed
Like,
to
at least
hostility
they
and
do that
resistance
much,
were
you
simply
know?
wiped off the map. Most nations and tribes fell into the former camp and
Not
found
to be a
themselves
Roman
well treated by
apologist,
their new Roman
but at
overlords.
least they do that much.
It was this policy of generosity that secured the longevity of the ethnically diverse empire. That, and the ruthless extermination of those tribes and nations who fell into the latter camp.
Okay, less based.
The stage is now set for one of the most important wars in Roman history, the Second or Great Samnite War.
It won't be purple
It is
for
comparable in
long.
historical importance to the Second Punic War, which saw the Romans defeat Carthage, and the Macedonian Wars, which brought Greece under Roman control. In the Second Samnite War, the Romans, for the first time, set themselves on a course of conscious expansion, with an eye on winning a far-reaching empire. It was a decades-long fight, and the Romans nearly lost a number of times, but when it was over, Rome found itself in control of all Italy. But before we get into all that, I want to pause and give a fuller account of the Roman legion, how it fought, how it operated, and how it was commanded. The
Bet there's a
Samnite
ton
Wars
of alt
marked a
history
period of
buffs
transition
who
for
are
the
like,
army,
what if
and this is a
Rome
good time to take a
colonized,
look at
like,
how the
ancient
Romans
China?
had fought in the past and how they would fight
I
in
think
the
they had
future.
like
The strategy
people
and
going back
tactics
and forth
formation
and-
of the
and,
legion
like,
would remain in place for the next 200-odd years until
the
Marius came
Silk
along and
Road still
reorganized it
existed
yet
then,
again. And I want you to have a
or
good
did
picture in
exist
your
then.
mind
I can't
of
recall.
what things looked like as we move forward, because it will allow you to visualize the battles of the upcoming Punic Wars better, and later to fully understand why the Romans were able to so decisively defeat the Greeks.
But they had.
So
I
next
think they
week
had
we will
like
learn about the phalanx, its
Chinese
strengths and weaknesses, and why the
ambassadors or
Romans scrapped
visitors
it in
popping
favor of the
down
maniple
to,
system.
to Roman
How many men a
colonized places
centurion
going
really
like, "Whoa,
led? Hint, the answer is not 100. And what the word legion
Peach yogurt with cornflakes.
I just had a cherry.
Cherries.
Me when I eat the berries. Wait, I got an emoji for that peach. Peach, 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 peach.
Peach. Peach. Eat the peach.
Next episode. This episode's called A Phalanx with Joints. POV, you are a 3D modeler and rigger.
Hello,
I want
and
peaches
welcome
so
to the
bad.
history
Oh my
of
god.
Rome. To answer one of the most basic questions about
My
Rome,
goodness.
why was it able to control so much territory for so long,
Oh,
one need look no further than the Roman legion.
Thank you.
There were myriad secondary reasons: competent hands-off administration, sound economic policies, and superior engineering skills. But at the beginning and end of the day, it was the legion that secured the longevity of Rome. No fighting force matched it in the ancient world,
I could.
but its dominance was
Me
not the
versus a
result
legion,
of finding a perfect method of
no, I can take 'em.
organizing and leading men and then sticking to that static model forever. Rather, the Romans constantly tinkered, rearranged, and improved the legions, depending on circumstances. One of the great virtues of Rome, and one the Romans themselves took immense pride in, was their ability to learn from their own mistakes and adopt the superior methods of their enemies. When I was in college, I took a course in ancient political theory where we studied Plato and Aristotle, the Sophists, and other Greek thinkers. But when we got to the Romans, apart from some cursory reading of Cicero and Marcus Aurelius, my professor spent the class periods teaching us legion infantry tactics and how the Roman roads and camps were built. That was Roman political theory, not discourses on the meaning of justice or comparative essays on state organization, but rather how best to build a wall and how to maintain lines of communication in the thick of battle. The Romans did not spend a lot of time with their head in the clouds, but they did
I
spend
imagine
a lot
that's
of
why
time
they
with
were
their
so
feet
good
in
at
the mud.
absorbing other cultures'
The power,
art.
dominance, and stability and legacy of Rome is all wrapped up in its army. Understanding the legions is critical to understanding the Romans, and shifts in how the legions operated mirrored shifts in the socio-political world that surrounded them. I originally intended this section to be one episode, but as I progressed it kept growing and growing, and so, rather than inundating you with too much information, I have decided to divide it into 2 parts. Today I will give a brief overview of how the legions changed over the years, and then go into detail about the Greek phalanx in particular, what it was, why it was so strong, and what its flaws were. The Romans used the phalanx until the Samnite Wars, when they morphed into a new system I will detail next week. For those of you with a background in ancient history, I'm sure you've heard more than enough about the phalanx, but I want to make sure everyone is on the same page.
Put me on
and
the
I
same
think
page.
understanding infantry tactics is critical to understanding classical Mediterranean history as a whole. In general, and this is very general, the army of the Roman Republic had 4 distinct phases. The first phase was ushered in by Romulus when he founded the army. It was originally formed like any other barbarian horde, with a strong leader leading a mass of men who charged at the enemy and battled hand-to-hand, one-on-one, until one side overpowered the other.
Pretty cool.
The second phase began roughly with the class reforms of Servius in the mid-500s BC. At this point, the Romans began to utilize the Greek phalanx, relying on disciplined, group-oriented attacks rather than the free-for-all of Romulus's day. This lasted until the mid-300s BC, when the Samnite Wars exposed dangerous flaws in the phalanx and forced the Romans to reorganize their entire army and start a third phase based
More
around the
foreshortening.
maniple, which I will discuss at length next week. Later, around 100 BC, Marius
Yin
ushered
gang.
in the fourth and
In the
final
phalanx.
phase of the Republican
Hey,
army,
Rad.
instituting a series of reforms affecting not just how the army fought tactically,
Maybe it's like 0%.
but also how the
whatever.
soldiers were recruited,
I find 0%
removing
is
property
usually a little bit like
qualifications
funkier.
and creating the first full-time professional legion. This was a major contributing factor to the death of the Republic
Hi.
and the rise of the Imperium. At this point in the podcast, we have reached one of those watershed moments,
I'll do this
the
hand later, fuck.
mid-300s BC, that saw a transition from one of these phases to another. And this transition is particularly of vital importance because it moved Rome from having just another classical Greek hoplite army to having an army that was distinctly Roman. The Romans, as I've mentioned, were heavily influenced by the Greeks, not just in art and culture, but also in the employment of arms. In the mid-7th and 8th centuries BC, the Greeks adopted a formation of attack called the phalanx, which was composed of individual soldiers called hoplites. The phalanx was the most formidable method of attack in its day and spread throughout the Mediterranean, finding its way to Rome, as I said, around the mid-500s BC. Put simply, the Greeks abandoned the chaotic charges of man-to-man fighting in favor of a highly organized formation, which would charge and engage the enemy as one. For hundreds of years, the only thing that could stop a phalanx was another phalanx of equal strength,
Or me.
hence the speed of its adoption throughout the Western world. A phalanx was composed of a single line, 8 to 16 men deep, depending on the battlefield and number of hoplites available. As a rule of thumb, deeper was better for phalanxes, and there were accounts of phalanxes up to 50 men deep in some battles. Commanders had to make hard choices, however, because the line had to be long enough to
I'd
prevent
find that
any
easy.
outflanking maneuver, which meant certain death.
No problem.
So a balance was always sought
I
between length
choked
and
on my
depth.
wagager.
At
Send
Marathon,
help.
for example,
Keep
the
coughing.
Greeks gambled by spreading their
Keep
phalanx
coughing.
thin to prevent the numerically
Keep
superior
coughing.
Persians from outflanking them. The
Practicing my
gamble
first
paid
aid.
off, but the
If
Persians
someone
nearly
is
did break the
coughing
thin
with a
Greek line,
partial
and had they
obstruction of
done
the
so,
airway,
the
do
history
not
of the
touch
world
them.
would have been altered
Encourage them
dramatically.
to cough, to lean forward
During
and
battle,
cough.
the men in the front line held their oval
Cough,
shields,
cough,
called
cough, cough.
hoplons, hence the name hoplite,
If it is
in
an
their left
infant
hand
who
and
is
long
coughing,
spears in their
you
right.
can mime
The
coughing.
hoplite stood
or
close
just
together,
cough at
and in
them.
such a way that their shield protected the man to
And
their
the
left,
principle of
and
baby
the man on
see,
their
baby
right
do
protected them.
will get them to start
This
coughing.
formed a shield wall that was virtually impenetrable. In between the shields, the spears of the second, third,
If
and
the
sometimes
partial
fourth
obstruction.
ranks
No, okay, I'm actually
shot
going through
the
this. I have my
gaps,
exam tomorrow.
stabbing and gorging anything
We're
they
going through
could.
this. We're doing this.
A massive
If that obstruction, partial obstruction, happens to turn into a full obstruction, you'll know because they can no longer speak, because there is no air going into the lungs. In the case of a child or an infant having their airway become fully obstructed, get a bystander to immediately call 911 and begin they called it the Heimlich for a while, and then they called it the J thrust, and I think now they call it something else, just like thrusts. But you begin on adults, larger children, etc. Abdominal thrusts. Place your leg between their legs, have them lean back slightly, or lean back slightly with their hips onto yours, and then lean forward as you put your balled hands under their solar plexus and thrust in a J upward stroke. Keep doing this until the airway is unobstructed. And in the case of adults choking, once they fall unconscious, then you call 911. With infants, you put them on their back, deliver 5 back blows. And then I believe you flip them back onto their back and start compressions. Continuously checking the airway. Every 5 back blows. Visually, if you can see the object, you remove it. That's it. That's how you solve airway obstructions.
individual fighters would simply be massacred. If they
Yeah,
attempted
nursing
a head-on
student. I love
attack.
this stuff.
They would be unable to
Fantastic.
break through a
Well, I'm sure I'll be
well-disciplined
handing off
phalanx.
plenty of half-drowned
Now, I know
people
what
to
you're
you
thinking.
when I
If
when
a
I get my
phalanx was
lifeguarding
8
thing.
or 12 or 16 men deep,
It is very
and
interesting.
only
Like
the
it's
front 4 lines were
it's funny because starting out, you learn like how fragile people are, and like just you get to see a couple videos of people either dying or dead. Like the other week, we got to watch a kid drown in Helsinki to breakcore music. The kid was actually okay, but he was like floating face down in water for 5 minutes with people like bumping into him and passing by him and not checking him, and it's just the most infuriating thing ever. And the whole time is like intense. It was awesome. Oh yeah. But it's a great example of what people look like when they're drowning, because a lot of people just think that their arms are going to be up and they're going to be splashing around, or that they'll be in a vertical position with their head up and just kind of looking around, another type of drowning. But this kid was doing somersaults. He kept doing somersaults. He couldn't, he was trying to like push and kick to the surface, and he was getting to the surface, but then every time he would pitch forward, do a roll, intake more water, and eventually he was face down. But the wonderful thing about doing first aid is it's terrifying to start because you see all these pictures of fucking dead people and like exogonal breathing, which is like fish-like non-breathing that heart attack victims, basically dead people, will do for hours and hours after they literally die. It's horrific. And then you'll start thinking that, you know, every heart palpitation is you having a heart attack, or every time you go up the stairs and your jaw kind of hurts, you're having a heart attack. But then you hit this wonderful part of, I do know what to do in case something bad happens. And I'm finally at that part. where I'm less of a hypochondriac and now just more confident about moving through the world. So anyway, take a first aid course. Highly recommend. Scary stuff, yeah. Nursing school's made you medically paranoid. It's bonkers. Yeah, it really does make you think about it a lot. Maybe don't do nursing school, but a little first aid class. You know. Nice thing about being a lifeguard is that I don't have to deal with folks after that initial, oh dear, I'm having a panic attack in the water. I just have to get them out of the water and then keep them alive until paramedics come. So you have my sympathies as a nursing student, but you are literally doing God's work, so thank you for that. Good luck. Marika, the Warframe Twitch is showing off Dante. His new frame. Ooh, he's cute. New frame. The fucking diamond shape. Warframe should hire me. One day I'll reapply. The 56th frame. Holy crap. I still have not played Whisper in the Wells. I tried to get back into Warframe after this last Warframe get together that we went to, TennoCon, which is very cool, very very fun, very nice. But then I spaced out and I'm like, I love Warframe, but boy, is it hard to get back into after playing it for like 2 or 3 years. All right, anyway, back to Roman history.
Attacking. What were the other 4, 8, or 12 lines doing? The answer is threefold, but all three folds relate to the all-important task of maintaining the cohesion of the phalanx. The first fold is that as the phalanx initially charged each other, and in the subsequent shoving match, the front lines had to be braced by the men behind them,
Me when I
so they
shove
literally,
you.
physically, could not be pushed back. The second fold is that the most common way a phalanx was broken was by retreat from the rear. Once men started running out the back, there was no more bracing, no more support, and the other army could push right through you.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look up
A deep line
foot
meant
references
removing
in a
those
minute. I
back
can't
ranks
remember
from
what
danger,
feet look
and
like
hence
from the
removing
top.
their desire to run away.
That's okay.
The man in the back line of a 16-man phalanx was in no danger of being
We got
run
the
through with a
express
spear,
draw that we
so he
gotta
wasn't
do
going to
here.
run. It's basic psychology. The third fold is that the stable back ranks prevented the men in front, who really were in physical danger,
Yeah, cute
from
outfit.
running away even if they were
I like
scared out of their
transitioning from
minds.
like the full like
If anyone in
triple
the
layer
front
outfit
ran,
to the
then the
cute
whole
bikini.
phalanx would break down and
She's
everyone
got like
would
cute
be
little
slaughtered.
antlers too, little tech antlers.
Now I know what you're thinking again, and the answer is yes. The first few ranks of a phalanx was a really, really crappy place to be.
I could take it.
Trapped between an enemy who was trying to kill you and
Mhm.
friends who forced you to stay put, even as they sat, essentially, on the sidelines.
I could take it.
The only way to live if you were in the front was to stick together and move forward, so there was a motivational element to the formation as well. There was, indeed, a lot of psychology built into the phalanx, maybe all that philosophizing on the
The
human
10 years of
condition
art book
paid
they
off.
announced at TennoCon? I did not.
In a warrior society like Greece, though, men clamored
Okay,
to be
I'm
in
gonna
the
move
front
into your
ranks because
garage
that's
so I
where
can
all the
airbrush all
honor
my
and glory
projects and
was,
shit. Good
and
luck
where
in
the
winter. I
commanders
don't think
placed
it's
their best
heated.
men. So, despite all the dangers,
Did your
they
sub
didn't
go
think the
through? Oh,
front
you
was
sub.
such a bad
Thank
place
you.
to
I do
be.
have. Oh fuck, I do have
To each
Nightbot,
his
but
own, I guess.
my ass
Now, a
doesn't
last
have the
important word
alerts.
on
It's
the
insane.
phalanx.
Oh wait, no, I got the
It was
alert.
designed for
I'm
and
sorry,
used
Luke.
on flat,
Wait,
open
Luke
plains,
Con.
where the ranks could be deployed
Chill.
properly, and there were no holes
Thank
in
you
the
for
line.
your Prime sub.
In a phalanx, a single gap meant death. The survival of the army was absolutely dependent
everyone,
on
it's
an
me again,
unbroken
Schlutguy.
shield wall. In Greece, this worked well because both sides used phalanxes,
I'll bring
and
it
so
here,
both
it's fine.
sought the same sort of
Base,
terrain.
base, base.
But against an army who used vastly different tactics on unstable, hilly terrain, the phalanx was vulnerable, a fact the Romans would learn the hard way.
Not my problem.
In the hundreds of
Go,
years
go
that the
back.
Romans had used the standard phalanx, they had been well served because they were fighting either other phalanxes
Right.
or Gallic hordes who were no match for a solid shield wall
She's good.
with hundreds of spears jutting out of it. But when they met the Samnites, the weaknesses of the phalanx became all
Gotta
too
get the
apparent.
big brush going on here. I
The
keep using
steep,
a little brush.
rough
It's
country
slowing
of
me down.
Samnium, where most of the fighting of the Samnite Wars took place, made it difficult to deploy and maintain a cohesive phalanx. Plus, the Samnite light infantry and cavalry, used to the terrain, were able to easily outflank the Romans. And as I said, an outflanked phalanx was as good as dead.
They should
This
grill
fatal flaw
themselves.
spelled the end of the
now.
Roman use of the phalanx. It was simply not maneuverable enough. When attacking head-on, a phalanx was indestructible, but once hit from the side or back, it was a sitting duck. The densely packed soldiers simply could not turn and set up the critical defensive shield wall
Holy
in
shit,
time,
paper brick.
encumbered as they were with heavy armor and long spears. If given
That
enough
is a
time,
paper brick.
the
That's
left or
sick as hell.
right-hand column could reform into a front line, but in battle time was measured in seconds, and a cavalry detachment that managed to get around the line was charging through the ranks in a heartbeat.
This is going to sound insane,
slaughtering
but
the
like for
closely
the same
packed
reason that
hoplites
I
who could
love
not even turn
Warframe
around to
and think it's
defend
such a good
themselves.
fit for my art style and want to get
This was
hired
why
by
the
them.
phalanx had to avoid being
because, like,
outflanked at all
that kind of
costs, and
bio-
why, when the Samnites proved they could get
like
around the
bio
Romans,
armor stuff is like
the Romans
so up
changed
my
forever
alley.
their organizational deployment to
For the
develop an
same
immunity
reason,
to
I'm
this
like
chronic
not
disease.
really interested in the art book.
What
just
the
because I'm
Romans
like, oh yeah, I
developed
know how
was
they
the
did
system
that.
that has been handed down as the
Or
classic
that's so close to my
Republican
art
army
style that
formation,
I don't feel
which we
like.
will
I mean,
talk
these are
about in
god tier
detail
artists,
next week.
but
The maniple
that's so
system
close
is
to my art
three-line
style that
deployment,
I don't really feel
famously
like I
referred
need
to as a phalanx
the art book.
joints.
But I wish everybody getting it their joy of it because it probably freaking rocks. Whew, what's happening here? What's happening here? I think I'm relying too much on these sources. Let's focus, gamers. Oh, that's the end of the episode. I'm too busy thinking about the Roman history to pay attention to what I'm drawing.
Hello, and welcome to the
Is this
History of
really the
Rome.
Twitter influencer MKDama6?
Last
It
time,
is.
we focused on the Greek
Hello.
phalanx, the formation of battle used by the Roman army until the time of the Samnite Wars. This week I want to talk about the new system the Romans developed during and after their war with the Samnites. The new organizational
influential I am
structure
after
would
I mess
remain
up
the
this car.
standard for the next 250-odd years
We can say
until the Marian reform of 107 BC
trust the
and
process,
become
everybody.
known to history as the Maniple system.
You gotta trust the
It was
process.
called the Maniple system because it was based around a tactile unit of 120
Okay, now he's too quiet
called a
again.
Maniple, which roughly translates as a handful. This unit was capable of acting independently of the rest of the army or in concert with the whole, giving Roman commanders an advantage over their predecessors who had to deal with the
Predecessor.
bulky single line of a phalanx designed only for closely coordinated forward movement. In a pinch, a general could now order off a single maniple to secure a ridge or plug a hole or turn to face an enemy from behind without jeopardizing the cohesion of the rest of the army. And the new Roman general had another advantage over his predecessor. The Romans abandoned the single line in favor of a staggered three-line deployment. At the outset of battle, the lines formed with 10 maniples in the front, 10 in the middle, and 10 half maniples in the back, arrayed in a checkerboard fashion. Some sources say there were 15 maniples in the front line, and some say there were 15 in the front too. The specifics are hard to weed out due to the lack of source material and the competing claims held therein. So I'm saying 10, 10, and 10 because that seems to be the general consensus, but just know that I could be wrong. And without a time machine, we'll never know for sure. Somewhere between 10 and 15 in the front two lines, anyway, and definitely 10 in the back. The front line maniples were made up of the youngest and most inexperienced soldiers, generally aged 16 to 20, out on their first campaigns. The second line was made up of soldiers in the prime of their lives, between the ages of 20 and 40. The back line was made up of the oldest troops, veterans of countless campaigns with all the wisdom and skill that follows from age and experience. Organizationally, each single maniple had 4 officers, 2 front, senior centurions, and 2 back, junior centurions. They were called centurions because they commanded a single century, the most basic organizational unit of the army, and a maniple was composed of 2 centuries, hence 2 officers. A Roman army's century was not composed of 100 men, as is commonly and mistakenly believed, but rather 60 to 80 men. The senior of the 2 senior centurions was the commander of the maniple and placed in the front right when in battle. They were expected to lead by example and be the first ones in and the last ones out of any fight. The mortality rate among centurions was thus the highest in the army, but again, as with the front ranks of the phalanx, men clamored for the position because of the honor it brought them and their families. The basic theory was to attack first with the front line only, who, being young, were strong and full of stamina. Ideally, the rest of the army would never have to attack, and the front line would take care of the enemy. But this rarely happened. Inevitably, the second line would be ordered in to support the first. These troops, hardened, strong, and experienced, were usually enough to secure victory. The enemy, worn down from fighting the Roman youth, would be no match for those youth plus an equal number of veterans.
The Book of
But
Bobo's
this was not
coming
enough, however.
soon.
The last line was ordered in to support. If this back line
Thank
got
you,
involved,
Luco.
it meant that things were not going well for the Romans. But the old men were usually enough to break the back of
Yeah,
a
the prices are
particularly
probably going to go
stubborn
up
enemy.
eventually, but
The maniple system was based
Not
around
quite
the principle of time-release freshness. Opponents of Rome would attack all at once and with great fervor,
but they truly
often
are.
overexerting
Hey, at least I'm
themselves
earning
by the
minimum
belief
wage
that
with
they
this,
could
though.
overwhelm the front Roman line easily and move on to the rest of the
That's
army.
why I really like
But
doing
things
these.
were
Is it
rarely
really
that
forces
easy
me
for
to
them,
stick
and,
with
bogged
just
down by the front line
working
of
for
Roman
set
youth,
3 hours and
the
then
opposing
fucking off.
armies became fatigued
With
and were then
with
routed
other bigger
when the rest of
commissions,
the
I'm like,
Roman
oh, I'll
army
send a
got
couple
involved.
more hours on it. It's fine. And then it's like,
Beyond these three basic lines of heavy infantry, there were three other
But you should
important
take advantage of the
elements needed
prices?
to complete the
No.
legion as it lined up for battle. First, there was the light infantry, made up of men rich
I don't think
enough
these will
to
ever get more
qualify
than
for
like say
service,
$30 a
but
pop.
too
But
poor to afford all the gear
I'm not
needed
gonna
to
go straight to
survive in heavy
$30
infantry fighting.
when I rise the prices.
In any
yeah.
given legion, there
Next.
were between 1,000 and 1,200 of these fighters, who, at the beginning of battle, stood in front of the three lines to mask the size and formation of the Roman army. When the signal for battle was given, the light infantry would rush the enemy and hurl spears and javelins, attempting to disrupt the cohesion and
Sniff.
inflict some minor damage, before retreating quickly through the three lines to the back of the legion. Light infantry never made much of a difference in the actual fighting, having served their
Close your
purpose
eyes
if the
completely
enemy
after
remained
all.
in the dark about Roman formations, and eventually, when the state began to take responsibility for the arming of soldiers, the light troops were phased out and folded into the rest of the lines.
Light troops go hell.
On the wings, as was typical of the day, the Romans placed the cavalry. Their job was to engage the opposing cavalry and take them out of the fight, so the two infantry lines had to fight head-to-head without help, a fight the Romans always felt they could win. Once the opposing cavalry was out of the way, the Roman horsemen would plunge into the enemy lines and attempt to do as much damage as they possibly could. In addition to these two basic tasks, the cavalry was always watchful of potential flanking maneuvers or surprise attacks from the rear. Constitutionally, the cavalry was initially made up of the richest Romans, the equites, but as the years passed, the Romans farmed out cavalry work to their allies, never being great horsemen themselves. And these allies were the third element needed to complete a standard legion. Also stationed on the wings, between the Roman lines and the cavalry, the allies were somewhere in between heavy and light infantry. Through the Republican period, they were led by Roman officers, but as time went on, they began to be led by their own chiefs, or generals. The allies were required to contribute an equal number of infantry and twice the cavalry that the Romans themselves provided. These draft requirements would cause constant tension between Rome and her subjects, and was the main precipitous for the Latin War, the Latins becoming fed up with sharing equally in the burdens, but getting shafted in the spoils.
That is
In
kind of
total,
bullshit.
the Roman fighting strength was optimally between 8 and 10,000 men, with 4,200 Roman legionaries, an equal number of allies, and just shy of 1,000 cavalry. The numbers varied based on time, place, and mitigating factors, and
so
these
much
numbers are
prefer
round,
the,
but they
these
will
ones.
give you
Yeah,
some
me and the
ideas to the
Manosphere
size of
idiots
the
talk
legion
about
as it
misogyny
marched
for
into
3
battle.
hours. Yeah, same.
When it marched from place to place, however, it was
I
attended
mean, every
by
once in a
baggage
while,
train of
I'll get jump
non-combatants,
scared. Like,
numbering them
I think History of Byzantium just had a guy, a podcast on that I think someone in my family actually recommended, and the guy they recommended, like, unironically uses the term woke, and then also is like kind of a fan of a certain British authoress. And I was like, you know what? That's about as much as I'm willing to dabble into that. We'll just switch to a different pod. Or we'll just not listen to that episode.
Selves in the thousands. So it would not be surprising to see a legion of
Night
4,200
Vale rocks.
men.
Night Vale
marching
rocks.
through
I
the
never got into
countryside
it, but from what I listened to, I'm like, oh
15,000
yeah, I
strong.
see why people like this.
When actually engaging
I
the
really like
enemy,
Soren
the
Narnia.
Roman tactics were straightforward.
He's got like a
Each
his
soldier
horror is
was
very
equipped
sad.
with 2 spears and a sword. As they approached the enemy, they hurled the spears and inflicted as much damage as they could before meeting them hand to hand. And this tactic differs little in theory from today's artillery, which is supposed to soften up the enemy for an infantry attack.
Me when I soften the enemy.
The Romans experimented with the composition and design of their spears, settling generally on an instrument that had a thin metal connector between the blade and shaft, so when the spear struck its target, the thin metal connector would bend under the weight of the heavy shaft behind it. And this served 2 purposes. It weighed down soldiers and shields that were struck, but it also made the Roman spears unusable to the enemy, for it was common practice in the ancient world to throw back spears hurled in by the enemy.
Pretty funny.
When the gap between the armies was closed, the legionnaires pulled out their short swords, double-edged and sharp at the tip. This could be used either for stabbing or slashing, and were incredibly destructive in close quarters. The famous gladius has not appeared yet in our narrative, which emerged after the Romans encountered Spanish swordcraft in the next century, but the principles behind that famous sword were already present. Once engaged in hand-to-hand combat, it was simply a matter of killing or wounding everything that moved until the enemy broke and fled.
You simply hit them until they
In
fall over
addition to
or
these
run away.
forward, offensive-minded tactics,
So based.
the new maniple system also had a built-in defensive strategy. If the front lines were overwhelmed, they could quickly retreat between the gaps in the middle line and regroup behind the more capable middle-aged fighters. If they faltered, then they could all hide behind the third line, and by this time the first line would be ready to fight again, which allowed the Romans to retreat without having it devolve into a frightened, unorganized free-for-all. The phalanx lacked this element, and once it broke, it was every man for himself.
Chill music.
The
also
maniple system
based.
also had the advantage of being far harder to flank than
I can't retain any of the
Any
information, so
attempt to
history
do
and
so would either
misogyny
be
doesn't
met by
make
the
much of a
cavalry,
difference. That's funny.
backline maniples ordered forward, or by frontline maniples
I go in phases in what I
themselves
want to
peeled
listen
off
to.
from the
Sometimes
main
it's music
fight
and
sent in
sometimes
a
it's
different
pods.
direction.
Fiction.
All
or
in all, it was a
history.
significant advancement from the phalanx, and as we will later see, when the Romans clashed with the
Sometime maybe I'll have you
Macedonians
guys
around
sit down and
200
actually listen to
BC,
some Soren Narnia.
the result
It's
would be a
very
clear
good.
and decisive victory of maniple over
See
phalanx.
why I couldn't.
But it was not just the system that made the legion so dominant. It's not that anyone could be inserted and the result would have been the same. Nor was it the case that the Romans were bigger or stronger than their opponents.
I am big and
In
strong.
fact, in many cases, facing huge lumbering Germanic tribes, the Romans looked puny by comparison. Rather, the legions prevailed because of a group discipline that became the nightmare of opposing armies. In general, ancient warfare was a passionate affair, with lots of yelling, chest beating, and frenzy. But the Roman legion was a cold, inhuman machine. They were never intimidated and rarely broke ranks. Their comrades could be dying to their right and left, but the legionnaire himself seemed unaffected and kept moving forward. This was unsettling to say the least, and sapped the morale of Rome's enemies. The Roman soldier did this not because he was unfeeling. Quite the contrary, the Romans were a passionate people. But in war, there was only one thing a legionnaire feared more than the enemy: his commanding officer. Roman discipline was notoriously harsh, though it was not without its positive aspects. It was based on a system of rewards and punishment that were designed to promote bravery and eliminate cowardness. Punishment ranged anywhere from psychological humiliation. For example, a disgraced sentry might be forced to eat standing up, so their comrades would always know who had lost their standard, to scourging for, say, disobeying orders, and up to death, a punishment that was handed down routinely when the actions of an individual put the entire army at risk, like, for example, falling asleep while on sentry duty. Woe to the sentry who fell asleep. He was stoned and beaten to death by his comrades.
Damn.
Not a pretty sight, but keeping watch was a sacred trust that could not be breached under any circumstances. It was simply too important. On the flip side, the Romans invented a plethora of fancy medals
the
and
monkeys
awards
listening to
given
monkey
out to
sounds? 'Cause that
soldiers who
sounds
distinguished
relaxing.
themselves in battle. I've already talked about the grass
Catho
crown
Ray
given to a
dude.
soldier who saves an entire legion, but there were literally hundreds of other honors. For example, an award was given to the first man over a wall when the army was assaulting an enemy camp or city. And this was not taken lightly. For whole centuries, lines and legions took it as a matter of great pride when one of their own took the prize. So when competing claims were brought to the attention of a commander, great care had to be taken in adjudicating the decision, because tempers were always running hot when awards were on the line. The most common rewards ranged from double rations, a huge motivator, to promises of more land when released from service, to heads of cattle. Anything a soldier valued
Holy
would be
shit, I
metered
love
out
cattle.
for instances of selfless bravery, which the Roman commanders were always promoting. There was a darkly humorous case during the Second Punic War of a commander promising extra rations for every enemy head brought back to camp. But the soldiers became so burdened by the work of beheading and carrying heads that they began to actually lose the fight. And in the heat of battle, the commander had to issue a proclamation that everyone would receive extra rations regardless of the heads, but they did have to actually win the fight, which the soldiers, now free of their grisly baggage, promptly did. This discipline allowed the Romans to keep their cool in battle and keep plugging away rather than running. They knew what would happen if their corpse was found on the field with a wound in the back. They would be buried without honor, and their family would be ostracized. Those who fled from Cannae, one of the greatest
Okay,
defeats in
well,
Roman history, were never
What if there's
allowed
a
to
sneaky
return
little
home,
goblin who sneaks
remaining
up
in
behind you?
exile, fighting
know,
in
stabs
Sicily
you in
until
the
finally they were
jockstrap.
allowed to serve as bait for Hannibal and die with dignity in a suicide mission,
Sometimes.
something they had pleaded
there are
for
goblins
years
on the
and were
battlefield.
finally granted. The last thing I want to impress upon
Monkey.
you about the superiority of the Roman legion over enemy forces was their meticulous attention to detail. It is often said that amateurs study tactics, but professionals study logistics, and the Romans embodied this belief. They took great care to always preserve supply lines, communication lines, and set up their camps
Guys, do
in
you
the
think
most
if I understand
defensible
Roman history, I'll be
possible
more
position.
butch?
This last was critical because
Is
the Greeks,
that
for
the principle of all
example,
like
set
the
up their
really
camps
weird
to
Roman
simply
history
be close
buffs?
to the site of battle without thought to any other practical considerations. The Romans,
I say
however,
really weird.
took
I mean
great care in
misogynists.
ensuring they held the high ground and were in a well-defensible
Are they like, I have
spot.
never been in a conflict in my
A
life,
routed
but
Roman army often staved off final defeat behind the
know all
walls
about
of their
Rome.
camps, and many Roman victories were secured by overrunning the poorly constructed camps of their enemies. The Romans always scouted and protected
Orangutan.
sources of food and fresh water,
Orangutans are
and,
so cool.
knowing that this often meant the difference
We
between
got
a
to see
strong
gorillas
army
at
in
the
the field
Toronto
and a weak
Zoo
one,
a couple
always
months
sought
back.
to
It
cut
was
off
so
the food
awesome.
and water supplies of their enemies
like,
before engaging in battle. Battles were often won or lost
Ape.
based on nothing more than the
Not
existence of a good breakfast on the day of the battle.
Breakfast.
So as much time as they spent trying to figure out how to neutralize opposing cavalry, they spent 10 times as much time thinking about how to secure pasture land for their horses. It was the boring details of making sure everyone had proper footwear and that the trenches were dug to a proper depth that really set the Romans apart from their enemies, who often had every intention of just showing up for
our
a fight.
trenches
The
have
Romans never just showed up
to
for a
work.
fight.
and be good.
They planned everything down to the smallest detail. The
Yeah,
fight
it's the
itself
classic
became
one.
almost an
Yeah,
afterthought.
yeah.
So there you have it. That, in a nutshell, is the Roman
Get your hair
Legion
out
of the
again,
Republic.
lady.
3 lines made up of units of 120 men, with cavalry and allies protecting the wings. More versatile than the phalanx, the maniple system would remain largely unchanged for the next 250 years, and it would be this incarnation of the Legion that did most of the heavy lifting of the territorial expansion throughout the Mediterranean. When we get to Marius, I will discuss at length the changes he introduced and how they changed the face of Rome forever. But that is for another time. Next week we will get back into the action as Rome prepares for her longest and most grueling challenge to date, the Second or Great Samnite
Okay, now I'm
War.
thinking about putting on some knife point horror, to be honest. Does anybody want to listen to some scary stories? I can't promise that you'll actually like them or that they're actually good. I think they're quite good. Like, I think they like should be serialized in a physical book format. They are so good. They are not your standard creeper pasta with a scary guy in a corner going
Blah.
But we can also stay. Actually, no, I'm not giving you guys the choice. This is my stream. All right, gamers, we're adding another 5 minutes onto this piece because I gotta find it. There's a lot of good episodes here. Let me see. Wait. Man, all of his summaries of his short stories are so abstract. A man in trouble, wanting only an escape from a crisis, stumbles across a mystery which leads to another and yet another, demanding a return to a dangerous place and time. I can't remember which one that is. Holy shit. Soren Narnia, please summarize them in Wikipedia terms, going through each plot point. Oh, this one's good. Sisters. The secluded castle, once rumored to harbor evil, has been redeemed by the influence of piety and innocence until something comes through the forest to return it to true darkness. It's actually narrated by the author, too. He does a great job. Alright, I hope you guys are prepared to be a little spookered, okay?
My name is Julien Sarraute.
No!
It is January
That's so scary!
1882. I'm an innkeeper outside the mountain town of Briançon, at the base of the French Alps. The inn does not do much
Kinda disappointed
trade,
you
and
didn't
in
put
the
on, like,
winter
a
months,
horrible
I'm
French accent
sometimes
for this.
alone for
Come on,
days
Soren.
at a time. In recent times, I have earned a pittance delivering dry goods once a month to Abbey Saint-Genest, 8 miles west. The abbey is housed in Castle Archambault, a somewhat forbidding edifice deep in the forest, accessible only by a winding road which is often made impassable by snow. In the time of Napoleon's rule, the castle had been the possession for 20 years of Count Archambault and his wife, well respected in their day and generous with their wealth. They'd been found dead in their bedroom after having disappeared from public for many weeks, the victims of suicide by poison. It was rumored that the Countess, Nadia by name, had dabbled in the occult and brought doom to herself and her innocent husband by seeking immortality through demonic visitations, turning the castle into an impure, accursed place, habitable only by those with total purity of spirit. All nonsense, of course. A tale conjured by fools to cruelly cast doubt upon the sincerity of the Count's donation of his land and riches to a church neither he nor his wife had any dealings with in life. The abbess of Saint-Genest, Mother Henriette, was a gregarious woman who invariably came out to meet my wagon during a delivery, and always insisted on helping
let
me
me
with the
share
load
the
while she entertained me with
Podcast
the
as well.
latest
Highly
joke
recommend
she'd
going
heard from the
through these.
man who helped the sisters tend their expansive gardens. I'd grown fond of her over the 2 years I
Uh-oh.
delivered to the abbey,
Photoshop.
sometimes taking the sisters' handmade crafts and pies back with me to sell at the inn. One afternoon in November, I loaded up my wagon with barley, rice, cabbages, and pears, and began the 90-minute trek to the Abbey to drop off the month's supplies. I got an unusually late start, and night fell as I went, the remnants of a recent snowfall settling in the woods all around me. As usual, I passed no one on my journey. The weather in these parts was unpredictable enough from October to April to dissuade any casual travelers from venturing too far into the forest. I arrived at Gola Road as day became night. The tall spires of the castle became visible through the trees a half-mile away. The road sloped upwards gradually, and a man on foot would be exhausted upon reaching the castle's front gate.
Not me, though. I was very strong.
This time, Mother Henriette was waiting for me just off the road, most likely having spotted the wagon from one of the castle's high windows. She laughed at my tardiness, and informed me that the Abbey was not accepting overnight guests, no matter the color of my coin. She opened the gate so I could proceed to the storehouse, where two of the sisters would assist me in unloading the goods. I never felt less than humbled on the castle grounds, small before its immensity, although it was surely of modest size when compared to many in the Alps. When we were done and I was to be on my way, Mother Henriette approached me, holding something in her arms,
Free guy.
something swaddled in a blue blanket. She introduced me to what she called her little friend, a baby deer that had wandered onto the ground seeking shelter. She held it fondly and maternally, explaining that the sisters had little choice but to watch after it until it could survive on its own, as its mother had never appeared. Peering through the growing dark, I saw that the deer was sleeping, its head almost completely enclosed and snug under the blanket.
Sorry, I accidentally navigated away. God damn it!
I was looking at the cool pictures that he had to share on each one of his things. Okay, where were we?
I got an unusually late start, and
Unusually late start.
the road sisters
Road.
would assist me. Baby deer
Baby
that
deer.
had wandered onto the ground seeking shelter.
Don't worry, gamers, we got it.
She held it fondly and maternally, explaining that the sisters had little choice but to watch after it until it could survive on its own, as its mother had never appeared. Peering through the growing dark, I saw that the deer was sleeping, its head almost completely enclosed and snug under the blanket. I told Mother Henriette I was surprised the baby wasn't awake and alert in the bitter cold, and she said she worried about that too. The poor creature often slept for hours and hours at a time.
You
I
wanna
reached a
pee-pee.
hand under the blanket and touched its little head. For some reason, the deer's body was incredibly warm to the touch,
Don't worry about it.
disturbingly so.
That's okay.
I mentioned this too to Mother Henriette, and she concurred. All they could do was pray for the beast and take care of it as best they could.
The beast.
And that was my November visit to the
This
Abbey.
is just Rennie, the beast.
I reached the inn by 7 o'clock and settled in for the night with a book. After falling asleep, I fell prey to some terrifying dreams. I came awake well past midnight, trying to shake a vision of a gigantic undersea monstrosity crashing through the bow of a ship on which I was a mate. At the sound of a crewman screaming and the bow splitting, dooming all on board to death in the ocean, my eyes opened in my bedroom.
And I had to rock
I
such
managed
a
to
big
fall asleep
piss.
once again, but yet another nightmare came for me.
I had to pee-pee my pants so bad.
I was tied to the ground in the woods at night, and a man whose head was encaged in a bizarre metal apparatus approached me, holding a baby high above his head. I was begging this man not to harm it, but then he stood over me, the baby crying and kicking,
Baby's gonna be okay, right?
and without a word he slammed that
Oh!
poor little child down upon my left arm, undoubtedly
Shit.
killing the infant with the awful force of the strike. I awoke at that exact moment, a dog howling
Baby-based
somewhere far
projectile.
away in the forest. I lay in my bed quite still for a moment, feeling a tingling in my left arm.
Hell
as
dear,
if, in
hell
fact,
dear.
it had been struck. Then, perhaps 5 seconds after the terrible dream ended,
I had to piss.
an excruciating bolt of pain leapt up my arm from fingers to shoulder.
I'm thinking that this guy's not going
A
to have to
second
piss.
bolt followed the first, and I rose from my bed in a panic,
To piss.
moving my arm into the moonlight that streamed through my window. What I beheld caused me to cry out in horror. My arm was twisted around so drastically it was as if God himself had attached it to my body incorrectly. It had broken in 2 places, white bone protruding just below my
Gee.
elbow.
Skillish.
I managed to stagger 3 steps forward, but then collapsed to my knees, weeping in agony, having no understanding of what could have happened to me. The thought that perhaps an intruder had broken in and
What
assaulted
painting
me
program?
fitted
It's
in and out of my
Photoshop,
fevered mind, but
unfortunately.
it simply could not be,
I'm probably going to
and
switch
this
to
would not explain the suddenness of
Psy
the pain.
after I'm done with Viscera Fest.
There came a final, grievous bodily injury I did not even
Not because
feel
like
at
Viscera
first,
Fest requires
but
Photoshop or
which
anything.
asserted
I've
itself
done
there
all
in
the
the
Viscera
dark
Fest
only
work.
when I began to
in
stumble down
Photoshop,
the
and I don't wanna
stairs
switch
to
it
the
up.
inn's bottom floor. Some of the fingers of my left hand and my entire palm had been burned red as if I had doused it all in hot water.
Okay, so your arm's broken
Only
and
3 or
it's
4
cooked.
days later did I
Shit
become
sucks,
certain
bro.
that the afflicted flesh corresponded exactly to that which had touched the tiny deer brought to me by Mother Henriette. Not 5 minutes after discovering my injuries, I made my way out to my horse and climbed onto his back with great effort, so as not to have my arm strike his side. I'd made no effort to wrap it. It would have been too painful. I somehow rode 4 miles to a veterinarian who I knew
Little bit
lived in
more
a small
timing on this
cottage
one.
by the main road, urging my horse to a
We're at a
gallop, despite
pretty
the fact
okay
that
place
such
here.
jostling caused me great agony. I simply could not take my time. The veterinarian's wife answered my plaintive knocking. Though the man himself was away, she had learned much from him over the years, and somehow she was able to set my arm just well enough so that I could get 2 hours' rest beside the hearth and set off at dawn, she plying me with narcotic whiskey from the moment I entered that saintly woman's home.
Drugs, drugs, drugs. Or, booze, booze, booze.
My injuries were slow to heal, but heal they did. It was immensely difficult to operate the inn with just one young hired hand as I recovered. But I hosted only 3 guests in late November, along with the semi-nightly visitors whose numbers I could normally count on one hand. I told those who inquired that I had fallen off a ladder while conducting a repair on the roof of the building, always privately musing upon what could possibly have caused the affliction. Nothing made any sense. Especially puzzling was the conundrum of the burns on my hand. The pain from these marks had faded quickly, but the redness remained for almost a week. On the 12th of December, a carpenter named Gorski delivered a message to me from the abbey. It was in Mother Henriette's hand. In the note she explained that illness had overcome many of the sisters,
COVID.
including herself, and that it was best if I not make my monthly goods delivery at all. She wrote that they had more than enough stores to last another few weeks, and that it was not worth the risk to my health to come out and make contact. I asked Gorski how Mother Henriette had given him the letter, and he said it had simply been nailed to a post beside the abbey's front gate, with a request that it be delivered to me. I thanked him, a bit worried, as the nature of the illness Mother Henriette mentioned remained a mystery.
Yeah, they're fine.
Most likely a virus had laid them low, perhaps almost
I
all of
don't know if they knew what
19 women
viruses
who
were
lived
in
in
the
the castle.
1800s, Soren.
More troublesome was the possibility
you know what? This is
that a
gonna sound like an
sudden
insult,
snowfall
but I
might
like
cut
that
me
he
off
does
from the
not let
sisters for an
history get
extra
in the
week,
way of
or
writing a
even
good story.
2
He
or
probably
3
turns these
possibly.
out pretty quick. And
If
he's
I was
just like,
not
fuck
able
it,
to
we're
get there
going
on
for
schedule
town, baby.
when such a storm did occur, I knew they might go hungry, being desperately poor. Despite the worth of Castle Archambault, its inhabitants themselves
Booze
possessed
is drugs,
nothing
remember
beyond
that.
what they needed to survive.
Yeah,
and
you
I
can
knew
totally paint
them
with
often to
Photoshop.
be in ill health because their most basic nutritional needs sometimes went
You'd
unfulfilled.
do 3D work in Photoshop up until like a year ago.
I awaited further news, but the next time Gorski passed by, he said he'd seen no more communications outside the Abbey's gate as he'd made his way past the day before. Sitting with a glass of schnapps, he did mention he'd seen one thing which had given him pause. He labored to describe it to me, uncertain as to how to convey the image in words and unsure of what to make of it.
Stirring tomato sauce ASMR.
The sun had been low in the sky as he
Whoa.
trotted on his horse up Gola Road. The sky orange and red,
Pot of
throwing
stirring.
everything into sharp relief. In a high room, he'd seen two silhouettes, feminine ones.
The scare grind never ends.
They were engaged in a frenetic sort of dance, he
Virus
thought.
is from the 14th
Though that wasn't
century,
quite
although
right.
apparently it meant venom. How
They were
interesting.
locked
Ah.
at the arms and were spinning fast, their heads cocked back, one body urging the other toward greater and greater speed. Trees blocked
Maybe
Gorski's
he's,
view rather
like,
quickly, and he was
actually
unable to
God-tier
get another look
history
at this
buff.
anomaly. I asked him to tell me the story again, more carefully this time, but again it led nowhere except into the parts of imagination which pondered such enigmas only in the lonely minutes before sleep.
Because what
It
the
was
microscope was like
approximately the 23rd of
1700s,
December,
and germ theory was
when a most
until,
unusual visitor came to my establishment. At that time,
Late
after a snowfall of
1800s?
14 inches over the course of a single
I
Saturday,
think they knew it. Like they knew how to quarantine.
no guests were staying at the inn, and no one at all had
Actually,
come in
in
for
France.
a drink or refreshment in 2 days.
possibly in the 1800s
Only when the weather warmed in April would the inn become
or
busy
1700s.
again, my life less afflicted with banal solitude. On the night I write of here, the front door opened at about 10 o'clock, and a tall man entered, kicking snow off his boots. He offered a subdued greeting and asked if I had a room available for the night and if I could tend to his horse. He was traveling to Font Christian and would set out again in the morning, but he simply could not abide the wind and cold he'd come through under a waning moon.
It's too windy. It's too
I
cold.
offered him a key, and he asked me to prepare him any sort of meal if it were possible, a cold one being adequate. After I stoked the fire, I went into the kitchen to fix him turtle soup and boiled potatoes.
Yeah.
When I emerged into the front room with this modest repast, my guest was sitting at the table closest to the fire, gazing into it, appearing utterly exhausted. His face and his hands were chapped from the cold.
Skill issue.
He was perhaps 50 years old, had a thick red beard.
This is a
and
$23
somewhat sad
commission.
eyes.
It's an hour. You have an hour of my time, and whatever I
asked
get
him
done
how
within
far
an
he
hour
had traveled
is
on this
it.
night.
Although I'm
privately
kind of breaking
amazed
that right now because we started a
He
little
should
bit
be
late.
out at all with the snow
But-
still so deep on the road.
I do think I'll call it right.
6 or 7
here.
miles, he said, especially concerned that his horse be well fed. I went to complete this errand, assuring him the animal would be given a suitable place to sleep for the night. He had finished his meal by the time I returned, and he thanked me softly as I cleared his plate. I led him to his room, which was just down a short hallway.
There we go. Turtles.
As I was taking my leave of him, he asked me something, finally speaking more than a few words.
Yeah, I'm not
He
even
asked
making
me
it a little
if
bit
I had
longer,
any
but
dealings with the abbey at the northern end of Gola
That's
Road.
why I gotta keep upping my prices because I keep going like.
I said
"Ooh, a
that
little bit
yes,
longer."
for almost 2 years I had delivered dry goods there on a monthly basis. He frowned severely, became keenly attentive.
Wish I drew that in black.
And had I gone there recently, he wanted to know? I explained that I hadn't, and told him about Mother Henriette's note. He advised me then to stay away from the abbey, even if I did not hear from her again.
It's yucky in there.
He'd just come from there
My
this
aunt has a
very night.
tortoise called Bernie.
A terrible sickness had befallen
Tortoises
the
are the
sisters,
land
he said,
ones. Turtles are
and
the
it was vital
water ones.
that no one go near them. I asked him when it would be safe to visit them once again, expressing my fears that they might not have enough to eat.
And he said no.
His response, spoken in a tired and
Okay, wait,
deeply
let's just make sure I
sorrowful
have the
voice,
face right here.
was that I should consider the poor women lost.
Get a little bit more eyeshadow.
I was flabbergasted.
Oh.
Lost, he said again.
Flabbergasted.
He had not been able to heal them.
Skill issue.
So he was a doctor then, I realized, and the satchel he carried was his medical kit.
Oh, wait.
He bade me good night and closed the door. I walked back to my own room, unable to fully internalize the ghastly news.
All right.
I did not even
Next.
worry for myself, my own
In
health.
Spanish, it's just.
I wondered what sort of God would allow this to happen to such pious women. But of course, disease has taken away many people of my acquaintance.
Me when I'm a turtle.
The Abbey was a most difficult place to live.
Ooh, this one I need
Its
to pull out a
unfeeling
reference for.
stone, a
This is
cruel
for our
conductor
friend
of the winter
Wild,
chill.
who's getting their hair
I
done.
would try to learn more as time went on. The thought occurred to me that perhaps the nun's adoption of a wild animal, even one so seemingly harmless, had brought them a devastating illness. I still remembered its odd and inexplicable warmth to my touch,
It was just a
and the
toasty
troubling
guy, okay?
imprint it had left upon my person. It was the very next day, after my guest had left the inn without a word before I even awoke, merely leaving payment on a dining table, that someone came after him. I was asleep upstairs at 9 a.m, having drunk too much the night before while musing upon the fate of Mother Henriette and the sisters. I roused myself upon hearing a faraway knock, wincing at the residual pain in my left arm that accompanied my every hour, and opened the front door to find a lad of perhaps 18 standing on the doorstep, weighed down by a heavy saddlebag. He asked me if Father Seraph were still here or if he had ridden on across La Durance. I told him I did not know a Father Seraph, but the lad seemed to believe he had stayed at the inn the night before.
Reference picture. Still looking for a reference
Soon enough, it
picture.
became apparent from the young man's physical description of my guest that the man had not been a doctor at all, but a man of the cloth. The lad wanted to deliver a message for him from Pramorel. He shortly went on his way,
Okay, I'm going to pull up a reference
visibly
picture of
upset
a
at the
guy who
thought of
looks
having to
exactly
follow
like
him through
someone
the
I knew
snow
in high
all
school.
the way to Font Christian and beyond. As the days
Exactly the same.
passed,
This
and
is
the
just my
precious
buddy
few
Alex.
who came to the inn seemed to have no more information about the Abbey,
My buddy Alex?
I became more and
Say hi
more
to the
troubled
street.
by the silence. Despite Father Seraph's warning, I knew I would have to at least ride past the castle to confirm to myself that there was no way I could help the sisters, no way at all. I had decided upon a Monday morning to set out on this task, but upon stepping outside an hour after dawn, I could see the mists over the mountains swirling ominously, and I knew the snow was about to blow in on high winds.
Mountain
11
snow?
inches
Mountain
fell
snow
before
never hurt someone.
nightfall, and the wind screamed as it swept down Clemencine Road, stranding me at the inn for another 3 full days filled with loneliness and troubled thoughts. On Tuesday night I set about a thorough cleaning of the inn's 5 empty rooms in an attempt to take my mind off such disconcerting matters. In the room that had been most recently inhabited by a young and very friendly scholar who had been passing through and compiling notes for a book about the episcopacy in Western Europe, I found 2 books that he had left behind in haste or absent-mindedness. One of these was a colorful local history of our region, penned by a man named Dufresne. I knew of him, actually. He'd taught at my school when I was but a lad of 17. I took a chair by the fire and
This
paged
guy
through
went to
it,
fucking school in the
ashamed
Alps
at my lack of
in
knowledge
the
of the area I'd
1800s?
lived
All
and
right.
done business in for more than 25 years. When I caught sight of a mention of Count Archambault,
He's the 1800s equivalent
more
of
slowly
a
and
quiet
observantly.
dude who is very
there was a
educated
detailed
and then
account
gets a
of the
B&B.
man's improvements to the land and the general area around it during his life.
Me when
But
I
the
point
pages
big
also
gun.
bore mention of his curious death beside his wife, who had also expired from poisoning, almost certainly by their own hand. 5 years after they passed, and 1 year before the Catholic Church officially took possession of the land, according to Archambault's will, after much legal dispute, the castle was inhabited by a respectable family named Rousset. They had become the center of a mystery, as all 9 family members had disappeared without a trace sometime in the year 1809, including 2 young children.
New hair on Twitter. I want to see. I want
Those
to see. I want to see. I
who
want to see.
came
I'm
to
gonna
the
look.
castle in response
won't
to
pull
a
them up,
curious lack of
But I'm
communication
gonna look.
found the place well appointed as always, but
Yeah,
completely
yeah, yeah. Oh,
empty.
holy fuck, that looks good.
The family's
Were your
horses
sides grown
unfed
out?
and
Was it
dying.
like kind of scary to get them cut
No
off?
explanation for their vanishing,
That looks fucking
and no
sick.
trace of any of them was ever found. It was at this time that whispers of some satanic influence within the castle took hold as never before,
Turtle.
and those
Hey,
who
Garnet.
believed that Nadia Archambault had been a witch had their notions entertained for decades. In the minds of the superstitious, she was a craven temptress whose true ambition had been to reach out from beyond the grave to consume the souls of the living. She was described as a wisp of a creature, pale as sleet,
Couldn't be me.
with a piercing gaze. Then there was the apocryphal tale of a soldier boarding in Briançon,
I got a cup of coffee to
who,
microwave.
struggling on foot through the great storm of 1801
Get them short after
to
several
reach
months
his
of being too
declining
long.
mother,
Yeah, I hate that feeling.
saw the castle rising in the distance against the stars and trudged up Gola Road in the hope that someone there might offer him a bed for the night. According to the legend, dutifully reported by Dufresne's rambling history, the soldier had seen through the blowing snow a small woman, wearing neither coat nor hat nor gloves, standing with her back to him in the center of the road. When he reached her, she turned and touched his chest with bony fingers, issuing him an invitation to lie with her in the castle,
Whoa.
where she would show him all the passageways she had created for one she called the Conqueror.
Oh.
On her forehead was marked an inverted cross.
All right.
The soldier had fled this woman, and upon seeing a portrait of Countess Archambault long after her death, swore it had been she whom he'd seen that night. Had he not supposedly been one of Napoleon's
So you're
most
saying he
trusted
didn't have that?
captains by that time, the story
was
would
you.
certainly have been resigned to the ages without a fuss. As I write these words, it is 4:10 a.m. on the 7th of January.
It goes good.
I find myself
my
writing as
lifeguard
much as
exam
possible
tomorrow.
about what came well before the last 4 hours, so as to put off the final accounting of what I have so recently seen and heard. Nothing matters in the end but what is real, not conjecture or rumor. After finally making it to the castle
Coffee.
and witnessing all my mortal heart could bear, I have now returned to the safety of the inn and can do nothing now but tell the truth
Oh yeah.
and report all that I saw on this
yeah.
mournful, godless night, if only to this journal. I could not leave for the abbey until my hired helper came to the inn to host anyone who might visit. So it wasn't until almost 8 o'clock that I set
Wild.
out
I
for
let her hit.
Castle
I don't care.
Archambault.
Hey, good luck.
I loaded
Thank
my
you.
wagon with some goods for the sisters in the unlikely case
I'm hopeful.
the
I hope I don't
information
hit
I'd
any
been
of the
given was
instant
completely
fail
wrong and they could use the assistance.
Things, but I don't think I will.
The weather was passable when I left, with low winds coming from the east, a crisp but not terribly unpleasant night. On the way I saw someone coming down the road in the other direction, a solitary man on horseback who was singing very softly to himself.
Brother, become small.
Aside from this man, I saw no one. I reached the abbey's gate at about 9:30, having traveled more slowly than normal, giving myself every chance to turn around, thinking of all the reasons I should not be on this errand. Moving on to Gola Road, I actually stopped
I
briefly
was gonna say,
when I could spy
someone's hair
the
looks a
upper
little
part of the
familiar.
castle against the sky. But in the end, I overcame my superstitions.
More of a feral grin he has, the better.
The first thing I noticed through the trees which fronted the castle was that there was not a single light to be seen in any of its windows.
Hold
Usually
up.
the sisters lit candles well before dusk and placed one behind every pane, more for the benefit of
Yeah, there we
travelers
go.
than themselves. It had always been a
most
comforting
dubious
sight
creature.
to see, an image of warmth and humanity on this frigid, somnolent road that stretched for miles in either direction without any glimpse of something welcoming. Now there was just a bloodless phantasm. The building looked as if it had been empty for 100 years. It would be very cold inside, the stone walls chilling one to the marrow. The low iron gate in front was closed but not locked. not a terribly unusual happenstance. I left the wagon and my horse behind and moved through it, approaching the front door, which I had never actually parted. In my right hand I held a kerosene lantern, having prepared myself for the dark. Embedded in the door was a heavy knocker shaped like an owl, which I
Oh,
struck
holy
5
shit.
times against the wood.
I've actually been stooped by
I
ospreys.
waited.
It was,
one
story
came.
time, story time.
I had not expected
It's a really short story. I don't
response.
even need to pause this. I was doing some work in Northern Ontario, forestry work, and we had to brush a trail, which just means like clean up a fucking canoe trail. So we portaged. Does everybody know what portaging is? It's when you canoe and then to go over land, you pick up the canoe and you carry it over land and then dunk it in the water on the other side. But we portaged on like a 3-day trip, and we happened across a series of osprey nests as we were paddling through like truly gorgeous Ontario vistas. And out of nowhere, we start getting stooped by like white and black streaks, dive bombing our canoes, and so we had to paddle the shit out of those boats in order to I don't know, not get an eye full of claws. So ospreys harassing people, very real. Funny shaped feet, like an X. Yeah, they grab the fish. Yeah. Yeah, it was just about the most Canadian thing you could have seen. We were all wearing plaid, too. That was a pretty cool work opportunity. Anyway, back to the scary story. It was a little scary. It was more fun. Like, I don't think they would have hit us. But it did work in getting us out of there pretty quick.
I pushed gently on the door and realized it had not even been fully shut.
This grin is going to be a work in
There
progress.
was no
here. Let's-
visible gap between the door and the jamb, but
How dare
someone
you
had
blame
obviously
it.
not noticed that it had never been closed. Or perhaps it had intentionally been left open. I entered Castle Archambault for the first time. All was black within.
All right, wait.
Closing the door
We're-
behind,
we're-
I chose to move like
One,
wind,
two,
expected
three.
a
We're
unusual
popping it back a little bit.
happenstance. I left the wagon and my horse behind and moved through it, approaching the front door, which I had never actually parted. In my right hand I held a kerosene lantern, having prepared myself for the dark. Embedded in the door was a heavy knocker shaped like an owl, which I struck 5 times against the wood. I waited. No one came. I had not expected a response. I pushed gently on the door and realized it had not even been fully shut. There was no visible gap between the door and the jamb, but someone had obviously not noticed that it had never been closed. Or perhaps it had intentionally
I'm going to
been
draw
left
V
open.
differently every single time, just so
I
everybody
entered
knows.
Castle Archambault
I've drawn this poor guy,
for the
like,
first time.
3 or 4 times, and
All
I'm
was
still
black
not
within.
quite nailed.
Closing the door behind me against the light
Or
wind, I
stuck with
found
the look.
myself in a long, drafty front hall that stretched
I think all the
left
different
and
looks
right.
kind of like match what I'm going for
The
each
gloom
piece.
enshrouded me, and my lantern
One
could
day.
not show me anything that was not less than 5 feet in front of me. The walls around me were
Sounds like
100-year-old
Johnny
gray
has some crunchers.
stones, virtually devoid of ornamentation of any kind. I called out a greeting, my words echoing with a sad hollowness, and I received nothing in return. I chose to move to my left down the hall, stepping carefully, my eyes trained mostly
My guy,
downward.
she's not interested.
The floor was scratched and in many places not quite level with the earth. My feet came to rest on dead winter leaves once or twice, a sign that perhaps the front door had been left open wider and longer than it had even first seemed. The sisters would certainly have swept them out right away.
No.
I knew it was true then that they had all perished. I needed a little more proof. I wondered if Father Seraph had at least sent men to give them all Christian burials before leaving the castle to its uneasy repose. The hallway ended at a short flight of curving steps. I ascended them, surprised at the din of my boots on the stone. Before me was a short corridor with a single room on each side. I moved forward. That was when I heard something. A faint musical note coming from the end of the corridor. Someone was at a piano, and from the depths of despair my heart leapt with hope. The same high G was being keyed again and again at 3 or 4 second intervals, meaninglessly. I followed the note down the corridor past closed doors bearing empty sconces. This hallway ended up ahead in a room with no barrier to entry. Holding the lantern high, I began to make out the shapes of furniture, and then its details. What I entered was a sitting room with 2 straight-back chairs and little else. Turning and casting the beam of the lantern to my right, I beheld the origin of the music. One of the sisters sat at a small piano, the index finger of her right hand resting gently on that G key. She lifted it and reset it, striking the note again for the 7th or 8th time. There was something deeply wrong with the woman, as I saw instantly. She was completely unclothed from head to toe
Based.
as she sat there in this tenebrous enclosure. My puny light revealed a naked and emaciated body. I would have looked away in shame had my eyes not been drawn irrevocably to her face.
Big boob. Oh.
The sister, one of the younger ones at the abbey, appeared blindfolded. But then, looking harder, I saw the truth of the matter was that she had been crudely and haphazardly bandaged around the eyes. She was utterly blind as she sat there, naked and unaware of my presence. She must have been freezing, but of it she gave no sign. I did not know what to say, or if I should say nothing at all and meekly withdraw. But then she sensed my presence and took her finger from that solitary key. The sound of the note faded to nothing, and there was silence.
So what's
save
your
for
opener?
the sound of the wind sighing through the castle's hidden crevices. Slowly she turned her head in my direction. The bones of her face protruded unflatteringly, and her lip had been bloodied. She said to me, softly and pleasantly, as if nothing in the slightest were wrong,
Nothing's wrong. It's fine.
"Who is it that has come to visit the sisters?" For a moment I was too taken aback to respond.
Oh.
Finally I managed to nervously utter my name and state where I had come from.
My
The
name
plume
is
of my
Jenny
breath
Johnson,
visible
ma'am.
before me. I apologized for my presence and assured her I would withdraw from the abbey immediately if she wished it. Out of propriety, I raised the lantern higher so as to direct its feeble glow only above her neck. But instead of asking me to retreat, she offered a slow, sickly smile.
Like, they carry so many
Even though she could not
diseases,
see,
but
she
also,
seemed
yeah,
to be
I've
looking
seen some
directly at
pretty raunchy videos of,
She
of
bade me stay.
people doing things to
Stay
pigeons
and
where it's
meet
just
the
like, holy
others.
shit, dude.
I swallowed hard. I could see a drop of moisture high on her cheek, and moving just a little closer could determine
It's like
that
the rat and mouse
what I was
problem
looking at was blood.
of, I like mice and
I
rats,
asked
and there's
the
a way
sister if she
to
desired a
humanely
blanket or
catch them and release
Food
them.
for my wagon or
But the
medical
volume that
assistance.
they occur at, and
I could
people's
not stop
unwillingness
myself
to
from
do
asking
anything
what was
about,
wrong with her eyes.
like treating them
She
humanely,
tilted her head strangely.
results in a lot of dead mice
She
and
said
rats.
that of course she had torn them out as soon as she'd been able.
Rats, rats, we are the rats.
Certain that I had misheard, I leaned in ever closer and asked her to repeat
Yeah.
her words. When she did,
Now we
in
treat
a
them like rat.
chiding
Yeah,
tone
we
that
should
made me
return to
feel like a
domesticating
child
or
caught
to
not paying
keeping
attention.
pigeons.
I asked her why she had done such a terrible thing.
Apparently, squirrels used to be
I
really
was barely able to get the words
uncommon
out.
in cities, but then they just you
She
know,
said that the night time was a tolerable time,
went, hey, these guys have food.
but that in the day, all the sisters saw much too much of this hideous world. I stood in stunned silence. I was about to offer my coat. nervous at the very thought of getting so near to this deranged woman, when she rose from the wooden bench in one swift motion. She was more emaciated than I had even thought at first, and a streak of wet dirt ran from her exposed hip down to her right knee.
Hey, when she's
She excused
dirty,
herself,
too. She's naked and she's
told me
dirty.
she was terribly late for Vespers, and suddenly took off in a run past me, moving trustingly into the dark, arms outstretched. Instinctively I reached out to her, my fingers only brushing her
You're
shoulder,
so right, and you should say
which
it.
was so
Correct.
cold to the touch that I would have believed her to be a corpse.
Pigeons. Oh, I want to
She
pet a
left the
pigeon
room
now.
and moved down the hallway,
In Toronto,
intent on leaving me behind.
tons of pigeons, and the
Mortified, I
opportunity to just
remained
pick
where I
one up
was.
is
The light
presented
of
to
the
me every
lantern
day,
gave
and
me
every
the
day I
last glimpse
resist
of her I would ever
because I'm like
have.
over
Her
65 different
short,
diseases to
ragged
carry,
black hair
and also
matted to
I
her
don't want to
skull as she
distress the
vanished,
pigeon.
feet making
But
soft padding
that
sounds on
plump
the
bird.
stone.
I see him and I'm
It was fear that kept me in place. Fear which had already overwhelmed my
Hold
sense of
pigeon
concern
gently
and
like
compassion.
hamburger.
like, would I really be distressing the
Being
pigeon?
there in the Abbey
I mean, I
felt like
probably
being
would.
in a
I shouldn't
tomb.
try and convince myself I wouldn't.
I knew that if
oh,
I
wanna
turned
grab one.
fully in the direction the sister had fled, I would continue out the front door,
And they're just free.
climb into my wagon, leave, and never return.
Yeah, get the fuck out of there, dude. Whatever.
So I forced myself to stand perfectly still and reclaim my nerves. 30 seconds passed, then a full minute. I shone the light around the room. There was a thin door set into the rear wall, and I went to it. As I touched the
fit
knob,
should
I
we put
felt a
thee in
gelid
today?
draft swirl around my legs and heard the
I do
sound
kind
of
of
a
like this
single
fit, and it does match what the
dead
guy's
leaf tumbling
reference is
across
wearing.
the stone nearby. I moved through the door and closed it behind me, trying intently not to let it make a strong sound as it latched. I do not remember the turns I took then, never daring to venture up the stairs which sometimes concluded a hallway's length. Climbing deeper into the castle before I was aware of all that was truly around me seemed a daunting, frightening undertaking.
To shoot
I
on
dreaded the
sight
way
a
the
kind of
castle so
parrot that's an
effectively
invasive
hid what
species.
lay ahead of me,
Oh,
reluctantly revealing itself in cryptic patches and sections before
that's
the
rough.
slowly weakening kerosene flame.
Yeah,
I had
every once in
no
a
more
while,
than
like
5 more minutes.
an animal will wander into like downtown Ottawa, like a whole elk, and like I don't like they have animal control come out and like look at the situation, and like you know I'm not gonna ask someone to wrangle a conscious wild elk because they're fucking big. I wouldn't have someone wrangle a conscious wild deer. They're too fucked up. They're too likely to, I don't know, bite your nipples off or whatever. But most often than not, they just end up shooting them dead anyway, like with a police sniper on a rooftop. And it's like, guys, do we not have tranquilizers? Like, I know it might cost a bit of a pretty penny, but if we can afford to pay cops to remove homeless people from the street, we can surely pay animal control to, like, shoot a tranq dart at an animal. And it's like, oh, well, you can't really estimate weight, and it might not work, and it might make it go panic mode. It's like, you already cleared the street. It's fine. Shoot it anyway with the tranq. And you know what? If it does die because you didn't do the right dose, whatever. Shit happens. Anyway, that's my rant about animal control. I would simply do it differently. All these experts, they should have consulted me first, is what I'm saying. But you also get, like, people culling carp. And what some people don't realize is that there are native species of carp. And so you'll walk by a riverbank, and there's a shit ton of dead carp, and it's all native carp. And it's like, brother, my guy, you didn't pull up the right carp. Nice fucking work, jackass. Very annoying. Wrestle that elk. I'd love to have pigeons. Why don't they eat the carp? Yeah. I mean, I've had carp. I'm not a big fan. I think it tastes like a goldfish tank. But there's got to be a delicious way to eat carp. Like, that one Italian preparation where it's like anchovies, parsley, lemon rind.
Ceviche?
No, gremolata.
Oh,
navigating the lonesome abbey's narrow passageways before I received another.
I think I'm
more
just one
ghastly
video away
shock.
from just going full vegetarian. Not gonna lie.
Suddenly the lantern's light fell upon
Opinion
two
pescatarian.
livid faces in the dark. I stopped short in my tracks, my heart thrumming. A pair of women stood under an archway, their backs against a cragged stone wall. They too were naked, scrawny, and they too had crudely bandaged their eyes with strips of torn cloth.
They're doing their best. You don't have to call it crude.
Moving the lantern slightly to my left caused 3 more faces to appear, all of them sisters of Saint Genest, once serene and humble servants of God, now unclothed,
No,
sick with some illness that had no name, and perhaps
Demonic
utterly insane.
possession.
Almost all of them possessed a sinister grin which belied their sorry condition.
That's really scary.
The oldest of the sisters, perhaps 70 years in age, spoke. She
Hey,
said
bitch.
how delightful it was that someone other than Father Seraph should visit them and perhaps bring them treats.
Treats. Treat Maxine.
She hoped whoever stood before them now would be kinder than Father Seraph had been, less given to judgment.
He's awful and I love him. He's
I
the
did
most
not
yucky
respond
boy
until
ever.
another sister asked my name. I gave it, my throat offering up those 2 words as if I hadn't spoken in days.
Wimdy.
One of them offered apology that Mother Henriette was not here to receive me. When I asked where she was, another replied that she had been among the
Which
first
one's
to
Carrie?
offer herself up for feeding.
Hmm.
I asked what that meant, and the older sister barked out hoarse laughter. "We must show him," she said. "It is almost time we fed the baby in any case."
The baby.
One of the assemblage, a woman whose scarlet hair hung down completely covering her face, clapped her hands like a schoolgirl. She said in a voice almost completely strangled by pneumonia that it had become very difficult to decide who was to be fed to the baby,
The baby.
because everyone wanted so much to be chosen. Perhaps
Wee-woo.
I could decide for them. It would be a kind of game. Feeling my own voice about to
Ladies,
abandon me from
That
fear,
sounds
I summoned it
awesome!
forcefully and told the sisters before me that I was ready and willing to transport them all to the care of doctors, and that I felt there should be no delay in this regard. "We hear so much of doctors," the oldest exclaimed harshly, "but we are so happy here, until the last of us has been eaten." Another stepped forward. Her bandage was cinched so tightly around her eyes that the flesh on its borders had gone red, perhaps from infection. I jerked back as if a snake were approaching me.
Rude.
"Perhaps," this one said, "the first among them to find me and touch me in the dark would be allowed to experience the feeding this time." This thought occasioned a titter among them all, and my very blood slowed in my veins. Giggling, 2 more stepped forward, reaching out playfully. Their hands were filthy,
Oh, they're
as
so
if they had been
yucky.
clawing in the dirt in the frozen garden outside.
I would pet Takamura.
I shouted at them to stay back,
Oh, is he the old
At
old
this, they seemed
samurai?
to
The
freeze in
ex
mid-motion.
corpo?
and expressions of surprise and genuine offense crossed their sallow faces. There was silence.
Based very true in that case.
Then the
Yeah.
eldest said that if I did not wish to play, I could not speak during the choosing. "Come, sisters, to the great hall, so we can finish tonight's event," she said. They all turned to the north, toward the
Let's
direction I had
fucking
originally
go.
been set on, and moved as swiftly as their
Me when I'm
blindness
going
allowed
off to be
towards
eaten
some
by an
unknown
unspoken
destination.
abomination.
I followed, amazed and dismayed at how easily they made their way, as if they'd all been blind since birth. Only one of them seemed to need her hands to feel her way, and I wondered in some dim corner of my mind if perhaps she'd been the most recent to take out her eyes, or beg another to perform
Gianni made
this
spicy
task.
noodles.
The agony of that act must have caused their frail bodies to decline that much more quickly. All were near death, I knew. At what point Father Seraph had given up on these wretches was a mystery. Perhaps he had been here for only a few minutes, or perhaps even days before he
Chat,
had
they're so
judged the
spicy.
sisters beyond hope,
Chat,
living cadavers to be
Are you
abandoned.
on
Chat,
during your
help.
stream?
But
These
it
are so
seemed
spicy.
bizarre to me that he'd simply not had them taken in, committed, to be later healed. There was nothing contagious here, it seemed.
Oh, it's those bulldog move.
The real
noodles.
illness nested
The
deep
really
inside
spicy
their
Korean
minds.
ones.
I followed
they're
them
so
until a
spicy.
dim light appeared up ahead. Then I hesitated before moving forward again. We were entering the center part of the castle.
Oh,
The great main room where
Ah, but
Count Archambault and his wife
I'm hiccuping.
had once staged lavish balls. The room was gigantic, cavernous, and full moonlight shone through frosted windows built into the high ceiling. The furnishings here consisted of nothing more than 7 or 8 wooden tables ranked along the wall so that the entire floor space was open, lending the place an intense echo and a miasma of gloom and desolation. The brain-sick sisters gathered in the center of the space in a pool of that moonlight.
It's a
seeming to
date
know
gone
just
horribly
where to
wrong.
stop.
POV, you
The eldest
you
clapped
did
her
not.
hands and said,
You put extra
"Now,
pickles on my date's
"Who shall it be tonight?"
hamburger when she asked for no
One
pickles.
sister spoke up quickly,
Spicy.
offering that she should be the one to end her life, since she had been the coldest for so many nights, and sometimes she could still make out shadows through one of her eyes, which was too great a burden to bear. This woman's bandage had slipped down some from her brow, and I could see a terrible indentation and scar there that had not fully healed. Despite the protests of 2 other sisters, the eldest silenced them and said that it was just that this sufferer be released from her bonds and should be
She was
offered
his queen.
to the baby tonight. At these words, the volunteer beamed, but then
Spicy.
expressed her concern
Okay.
that the baby might
I wanna
not
go
be
back for more
awake to
noodles.
receive.
Except,
The
okay,
eldest
yeah,
said
that's
they
allowed.
must all call to him
Ah,
to make
toxic.
sure he awoke.
Love it.
There came the most horrible, most haunting hymn I have ever heard expressed by human voices.
What if it was the German
As the
rat song?
sisters began in unison a grim performance of some song I feel no man on earth has ever heard,
Rats.
an eerie,
We are the rats.
atonal convocation in a language utterly foreign to my ear. They all knew every word by heart, and sang with their faces to the ceiling.
We cannot
their
start a
bodies
girlfriend war in
rigid.
chat, folks, please.
I cannot prove, but would swear
But
on
all
King
girlfriends are
James Bible
queens.
that the sky, as glimpsed through the windows above us,
Spicy.
changed ever so slightly, becoming tinged with a murky crimson color for just a moment, as the song faded blessedly into nothing but a ghostly echo. It might only have been an anomaly
Let's see
in
if
the
I can get
adjustment
this
of my night
hand
vision
right
to the
without making him look
unfamiliar
very silly.
surroundings, but it had been so vivid that
They
this
must be
change
ma-
in the
sacrifices
sky and
must be
nothing
made.
other was what had caused me to look upwards.
Sacrifices at the altar
No
of
sound I would ever hear
capitalism.
again could be so disturbing, or so I thought in that instant.
Spicy.
For what followed was indeed worse. At the eastern end of the space was a pair of huge oaken doors which must have led out into the courtyard where I had sometimes left my deliveries. Bordering that courtyard, I remembered, was a lovely garden which in spring hosted a profusion of daffodils and irises.
Garden.
The eldest sister turned in my direction and said that if I was still here, I would now see
should
how
go eat
well
more
they
of
had
those
all
noodles.
fed the baby who had come to them as a tiny and wounded victim of this unforgiving world.
Whoa, it's a true bestie.
Almost immediately after she spoke, I heard from beyond those doors a shifting movement, as of something of great size coming forward. After that came the sound that sent a thunderous shiver all through me, causing my recovering left arm to
Okay, I'm
ache
not
and my
repeating
flesh
that
to
one
tingle
out loud
so
in chat,
sharply,
but also.
it was as if I had been stung by 1,000 bees. There was a baritone animal grunt from the courtyard, and then a low, shaky growl, throatier than a grown lion's. The flood then, but instead I watched
This
as
is
the
the history
naked
of Rome.
volunteer strode without hesitation toward the doors, even the soft
Not as
pads
corrupt
of
as she
her
could
feet
be.
creating echoes. The sisters encouraged her as she groped clumsily for the heavy wooden beam that served as a locking mechanism and barred whatever beast that crouched in the cold outside from entering the castle. With what little strength she had left in her broken body, the damned woman lifted the beam and pushed her way out into the night. Leaves rushed in and the wind curled its icy fingers around me. The sisters seemed unaffected as they clapped and called out happy goodbyes, never telling us to volunteer by her giving aid.
Yeah, okay.
The right-hand door swung backward, and aided by the wind, slammed heavily shut.
Yeah, this is very scary, but la dog.
From outside, there came a high-pitched, rising animal shriek, causing me to slam my eyes shut and turn away, tears spilling down my
All right.
cheeks.
It's
The
not fucking
creature,
around, chat.
the baby that had gorged itself on human flesh and soul to become a behemoth, snarled, and I thought I heard a wet, clamping sound and a thud of something hitting the earth.
Comical eating noises.
I ran then, abandoning the women to whatever horrors fate had in store for them. Thrusting the lantern forward, I forced myself to move as fast as my feet would carry me. The worst thing I could possibly do was take a wrong turn in that accursed labyrinth. And yet it happened.
Talking a lot of shit about this free
Beyond
castle.
the sitting room where I had encountered the woman at the piano, I went stupidly in the wrong direction, which I realized quickly when I came to an intersection
Skills.
that would take me either west or east, from a wall on which hung a painting depicting the selling of
East.
Joseph into Egyptian slavery. As I turned, I looked behind me to quickly make certain I was not being followed.
Spicy.
The light fell
I'm
across
still being
something in
hit
the
by spice
shadows,
gamers.
something that was only 3 feet in front of my face. I had missed it in the dark. I was looking at a pair of legs attached to a nude body hanging from an overhead beam. One of the sisters, whom I recalled as an enthusiastic helper in assisting with my deliveries, dangled at the end of a piece of shredded blanket, her eyes open and gazing directly at me through soiled black hair. I looked at her for no more than a moment, sparing no more time for pity, then retraced my steps. Soon I found myself again in the front corridor. There the temperature within the abbey was at its coldest, digging into the very marrow of my bones,
How is Gianni
yet I
able
felt
to eat
impossibly
2 packages of
graced
those hot
to make
noodles
out
at a
the
time?
main door with my ever-evolving vision.
I just heard a spoon clatter.
My lantern,
He
which
finished.
by now
He's-
produced no
he's
more
done
than a
with the
candle's
noodles.
glow,
Like I have like a
extinguished
headache
itself just then,
because those are so spicy.
having lasted exactly as long as I had needed it, for which I will be eternally thankful to whatever force delivered me
monster,
from that
you know that?
interior hell. I pushed on the door
He says
and
yeah.
went out into the night. The droplets of snow
Krill
that had been
issue.
sifting down from the sky upon my arrival had become larger flakes, promising a prolonged fall. As I neared my
inhuman.
wagon, I endured the final jolt of seeing 2 human shapes coming towards me. Nothing more at
I
first than
like spicy food,
indistinguishable
but
shadows.
I hiccup when I eat
I
it,
halted
and that makes
and
me
prepared
like
to defend
inhale
myself
it,
however
and,
I could
and
from
then I
harm.
choke on it. So
But was immeasurably relieved to find that these were 2 healthy men, heavily fortified against the winter conditions by many layers of heavy clothing. One of them carried a hunting rifle. He commanded me to remain where I was while they approached.
okay.
I did as he requested, and it was now a stranger's turn to raise a lantern to illuminate my own terrified face. After identifying myself to the gun-bearer, who was quite young while his companion was well advanced in years, he told me they had come at the behest of Father Seraph, and they intended to do what needed to be done inside
Now, unfortunately,
the
the grip on this revolver is
Understanding
not
at
the
once
same
that
as the
their
grip
intention
grip
was
that would
merciless
appear on a
violence.
Galactus.
Abbey. I urged them to reconsider their course,
Or, I don't know, whatever
pleading
he
for
has, a
mercy for
fucking
the
Sig.
sisters, however insane they had become.
No, that's a Glock.
And did they realize,
But
I asked them,
that's okay.
that there was a force here beyond our comprehension?
There's something really yucky
Something
here, dude. There's a bunch of
monstrous
naked
and
nuns.
perilous that might even now be roaming the castle grounds.
God forbid women do anything.
To this, the younger man replied that They were aware of precisely what they had come to confront. Father Seraph had instructed them carefully, and as representatives of the church, their hands and hearts would be sure. Just as I had mistaken Father Seraph for a doctor, so now I had mistaken priests for common men. They would not leave until it had all been resolved, and the abbey was cleansed of the devil's touch. With this, they brushed past me and headed in. I watched until they parted that heavy door, the old man following the younger,
Gun anatomy can be
carrying
hard.
just one lantern between them.
We're just gonna wing it, pals.
The time had come to preserve my own life and never return to the abbey,
Get out of there, girl boss.
and I did not wish to hear a single gunshot ring out in this once holy place. The ride back to the inn held nothing fearful beyond the harsh elements and the hidden mysteries of the forest.
We're gonna keep this gun abstract here. There we go. Yeah,
I
yeah.
sit here now in my room as the first blue hints of dawn tinge the sky,
Damn, you wrote all that in a night?
marking it exactly 7 hours since I left the abbey. I wish now that I had urged the men to come to the inn when they had completed their infernal work, so that I could
It's a
know they had
little
managed to
rough when I
leave the
think it
sisters
breaks.
without coming to mortal harm. I have no way of knowing if they were successful in returning the abbey to the state it knew after the
Try
strange
maybe
death of
one more
Count
iteration with a
Archambault,
smile.
and before 4 generations of
Try
nuns
and make
called
him
it their
slightly more
home,
evil.
a state of emptiness and hollow echoes, neither good nor evil. How I wish 2 strangers would soon knock on my door seeking food and drink, and rooms where they could sleep off their exhaustion. I cannot rest tonight knowing there's still a chance that Father Seraph might himself be the next to come, to stand on my doorstep and inquire after those men. Ask me if I knew why they had never returned from their nighttime journey to the forest. Worse still, perhaps the knock that comes from outside will be softer, weaker, that of some frail and eyeless woman who wishes me to visit her once again
She wants to have
before she
pals to
offers
hang
herself to a
out.
sinister entity no one living dares name.
That's really scary, guys. That was really spooky. Is everybody spooked?
Chalky milk.
The world's most inconvenient milkshake. I'm not saying anything too important. I'm deciding whether or not I want to keep this wolfish grin or stick with the slightly more subtle one. That's not as evil, but you know. Let's see. Get another episode in here. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. I should have taken more bites of Gianni noodles while I had a chance. Hmm. That's a good episode. Yeah, we'll just do this one. This one's called Sounds.
La 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 la.
All right.
La 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 la.
I like it when my men have fangs to chew on my meat. Mood, 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 mood. Alright, let's...
My name is Kenneth Vilma.
Die, Chin!
December 17th, 2010 marked the third day of my escape from Grosvenor Penitentiary in Chrysalis, Michigan, and my second day in the Wolf Paw State Forest with another convict, Ron Heil. We'd been on the run since paying off 2 guards to help us escape during a work detail on the side of Interstate 60. Our plan had been to move
This
on
is a
foot
story
for 3
for,
days until we reached a safe house in Lemus.
Those in need of
To
accessibility.
reach it, we had to take a complicated route through
about a deaf
miles of
man
woods on the first night,
encountering untold horrors.
and then enter the state forest, careful to avoid any marked trails, which slowed us
I guess
down more
those
than
who
we
are
thought
hearing
it would.
impaired will not be able to enjoy this one. But
Ron had planned the route based on one guard's knowledge and map-making attempt of the area. He'd grown up in the southern part of the state. We figured the search for us wouldn't extend too deeply into the forest, since it was by far the most laborious way to get anywhere. But to guarantee our safety, we'd been willing to endure the cold hike for as long as it took. We slept pressed against logs that first night, shivering in the thin clothes we'd worn under our prison fatigues. We hadn't been able to fortify ourselves with anything more, so as not to arouse suspicion when being transported to the work detail. We had $40 in cash each, and Ron was carrying a disposable cell phone that he would use for exactly one call, to be placed to his contact at the safe house in the farming town of Lemus when we got close to it. The escape had cost us all the money we
I
had in
hear
the
Gianni
world.
started to stream.
So far, at least, we'd gotten lucky. We'd counted on the guards to give conflicting reports about where we seemed to be headed when the escape happened on the side of the road,
Based guards.
and by nightfall we'd only seen 2 helicopters in the sky and felt no real threat of discovery. We hiked through the cold, eating only granola bars
I don't
and
know if I
Slim
like this
Jims.
version.
It snowed 2
I
inches
think I'm
as
gonna
I
go with the more
slept,
subtle version.
while Ron kept watch. When I woke up, I was as cold as I've ever been in my life, and I couldn't stop shivering. But we just had to keep moving. We warmed up as the 20-mile-long second day progressed, but we both dreaded that second night. The guard had marked a shack on the map that he remembered, and it was still there. Nothing more than a hollow wooden structure built by and for hunters, but no longer used since hunting had been outlawed in this section of the forest. We were taking an enormous chance going in there, since it was the most obvious place to look for 2 men on the run, and so we spent only half the
When I'm
night
looking
inside
for
it.
2 men on the run.
For the rest of it, we huddled against one another in a deep ravine, hunched tight under a natural rock overhang where only a little snow had gathered. But sleep wouldn't come. The wind was too high. I worried about frostbite and pneumonia. We went through the spare pairs of socks we'd smuggled out, and the work gloves we wore helped some, but the snow on the ground got our clothes wet, and that was really damaging. I had a continuous sharp pain in my left thigh, in addition to my being simply exhausted. Ron was stronger than I was, and I almost resented him for it. He'd also been smart enough to let his hair grow as long as he could get it before the escape, as our thin hats weren't as much help as I'd hoped.
Real.
When I finally did drift off just a little bit before dawn, I had the most frightening dream of my life. In it there was a man standing far away in the middle of a huge patch of rolling farmland under a full moon. I couldn't see his face, but I knew this was the man
Cat fighting?
who
Oh,
I'd
yeah,
had
cat
a small
warfare.
hand in killing 6 years ago. I
It's
hadn't
okay
pulled
if
the
you want to
trigger,
double
only
stream or
helped
even
to
switch over to
bury
his.
him in the middle of the
I'll
night when
understand.
he'd shot himself because of his involvement with me and 4 other men who'd pressured him into embezzling $100,000 from a Union treasury. I'd held his suicide note in my hand, and I burned it.
You can't do that.
I didn't have to read it first, but I had, and I would never forget the strange drawings he'd made in the margins. Incoherent doodles he'd retraced several times in black ink when he'd probably stopped to collect his thoughts before writing more words that implicated us all. One of the doodles had been a pair of eyes, wide staring eyes. Another had been of a dragon. In my dream, the man was pointing up into the night sky, wanting me to look. The sky up there was filled with strange red clouds coming together to make
Get a
the
little bit
sinister
of color on
dragon
this.
from
We got
his
like
suicide
3
note.
minutes.
And then it ended. By the beginning of day 3, I could tell Ron was considering altering our direction so we could maybe find a place to get some new clothes and a meal. But we stuck to the plan, walking along with hands clamped over our ears to protect them better. The day was gloomy and overcast.
I
and it
prefer
looked
being in
like
small
more
streams
snow
so I
was
can
coming.
actually chat. Yeah, I hear that.
We decided to follow the John Adams Trail for a while, which was taking a chance, but we were becoming too sick and exhausted to keep on going parallel to it. We didn't see anyone at all. It felt like we were alone in the forest. I've been deaf since birth, and it had taken a lot to convince Ron Heil to include me in the escape attempt that he'd mostly arranged. We'd known each other at Grosvenor for almost 3 years. We'd always communicated with paper and pen, and on our slog through the forest he'd brought along a black marker and 10 blank white index cards to write messages to me whenever he needed to. It was a primitive system, but it had always worked. At about 2 o'clock on the 17th, he wrote his first message of the day to me. There had only been 3 total since the escape. His message consisted of only 2 words: helicopters and lots. He pointed up at the sky and crouched down off the trail a bit, frowning. I couldn't see anything up there. The helicopters he heard weren't passing directly overhead. Ron was motionless for such a long time that I tapped the ground to get his attention and looked at him quizzically. He just held up one finger to suggest that I wait. There must have been still more helicopters going overhead. Ron scanned the sky suspiciously. Finally, it seemed okay to move on. Based on the duration of our stop, I began to get very worried. Maybe the search had suddenly intensified. Maybe we'd been seen, or maybe the guards had revealed our plan. I couldn't imagine any other reason for such an apparent gathering of choppers. When Ron began to move again, it was no faster or slower than normal, but we decided without any real consultation to abandon the trail. We were going to have to be even more careful as we got close to the safe house.
Yeah, just
I
cool
began to
edits. I
feel a
popped in.
little
Actually, those
safer
are
when
great.
an hour passed, and we stopped to eat what I guess
I
had
can't
to be
remember which
called
account I
lunch.
followed you with. I have like 3 different YouTube
After that, we were
accounts.
entirely out of food, which was the least of our worries. According to Ron's
Although I did
cell
watch
phone,
them
it was
while
3:30.
imbibing
He looked
a
up
few
again.
fun
He pulled out the index card he'd written on an hour before and tapped it.
euphemism for marijuana.
This time I did
edibles.
see 2 helicopters go overhead, but they were at very high altitude.
But
We were sitting in a carved
At
out
that
section
point,
of
I really
rock
liked
and
him,
couldn't be
so
seen from above,
take
so
that
we
as a
wouldn't be
compliment.
spotted in that moment.
I paid attention.
Still, it felt like we were being closed in on. The wind picked up as we went, blowing snow.
I'll try and watch
For all
them
we
when
knew,
I
a
have
major
a
snowstorm
couple
was
of,
coming. We walked a little faster.
well, you know.
If the snow came down hard, we might be facing another night in the woods, and I didn't know if I could take it. My breathing had become scratchy and labored. My lungs were working way too hard.
Excuse you.
I could see, but not hear, Ron coughing from time to time, and he didn't look well at all.
Make these eyes a bit more gold, and
If
then we're
anyone in
gonna
the
call
forest
this
saw
one
us, they would
done.
think we were homeless. That is, if they hadn't seen our photos on TV by then.
I just heard Gianni just screaming.
It was
from
about
the other
4,
room.
and the sky was losing light when we saw the dead
Gamers,
deer
what
near the
is he
John
up
Adams
to?
Trail. I noticed something up ahead, and very quickly I realized an animal had been gotten to. But the extent of it didn't come into view until it was too late. There were 3 deer near a wide part of the trail, almost a clearing, and they'd been torn apart completely. Some wild animal had taken them all down. The blood of the animals was the only color in the forest, which otherwise was nothing but gray, black, and white. The scene was such a mess that we didn't even want to walk through it. A dog pack maybe, or coyotes in the area. Civilization wasn't more than 4 or 5 miles on either side of us, but there was everything in these woods. We saw that parts of the deer were missing. They clearly weren't all there. We couldn't help but stare. It had been such a massacre. We took a long detour around the deer and picked our way through the trees. The last part of that weird, gruesome puzzle that I saw was a deer's head, a good 100 feet beyond the scene of the attack.
I've seen
It
that.
occurred to me as we went that a low-flying helicopter would see a spray of red in a jagged circle in the woods and might go in even closer to have a look. But I refused to believe that after all we had planned and been through that we would be caught. I wouldn't let myself be caught or ever go back to prison. It was unthinkable. We stumbled forward,
Well, the Trailer Park
Just
Boys said
3 minutes
that,
later,
but
I was
the
so
Trailer Park
focused
Boys
on
end up in prison at the end
merely
of every
putting one
season,
foot in front of the
so-
other that I didn't notice Ron had stopped entirely. Naturally, I couldn't hear his footsteps cease. He was standing there, looking at me. I shrugged, and he got out the index cards from the vest pocket of his shirt again. He wrote the word sirens on one and pointed behind us. Then, after a moment's thought, he pointed off in another direction, too. We stood rooted in place. He added the words far away to his note, barely legible.
That is if
And begun
copyright
to
doesn't
shiver.
snipe you.
The wind was strong.
I think at
our
worst they
clothes
can only
were freezing
demonetize
to
you,
us.
which, you know, when you're a small
I
channel,
began
I
to
guess is less of
despair
a
then.
problem.
I had underestimated the
I
lengths
think at the only
the
worst.
law had gone to find us.
Twitter will make you take it down.
I waited for Ron to start moving and followed him. He was looking at the map intensely. He stopped very soon and waved me over to him. He traced a finger along the map and showed me how, if we got back on the John Adams Trail once more, we could obviously save a lot of time. And he traced his index finger off it at one point to show how we would
Yeah.
diverge from it about a mile from our destination. He looked at me, waiting for some kind of response. His eyes had gotten very wide, like
Philander
they
the Lustrous.
sometimes did when he became a little frenzied.
Oh yeah,
overly
strikes.
intense
I forgot
about
the
something.
strike system. I'm really glad that
Sometimes I could see the
AMVs are
anger
like
there.
still how folks
How frightening it might
like
become,
have fun and like
must have
express
been to bring him
themselves.
to Grosvenor for a 7-year
Like that's how I
sentence for
started
battery.
doing a lot of
His
stuff
third
online. Is I would
conviction.
also make AMVs.
His
not a
breath billowed out of his mouth.
I wonder if Nostromo
At
is
some
still
point, he'd
relevant
gotten
in
a
this
deep
day and
scratch
age.
on his neck, probably from a passing branch, and blood was frozen to it. Without thinking too much about our options, I nodded. Just moving fast felt good. We had to try it. The clouds overhead were ominous, and it was getting dark.
No, it's fine.
10 minutes went by, and the woods only got deeper.
All right, I'm gonna call this
We'd made a
one
navigational mistake.
done.
Ron kept shaking his head, and I saw that he was getting more and more frustrated. We'd just seen the trail when coming across the deer, but now we'd lost it in an attempt to shortcut our
All
way
right,
over
we're
to
on a
it,
thermo.
and it felt like we were veering
Okay,
off.
we're on a thermo, but I'm gonna stir my
We stood there and
soup
looked around.
pot or my sauce pot.
There was
here.
no sign of a true break in the trees, nothing. To our right,
Making
the
a
terrain
bolognese.
plummeted downward dramatically into yet another deep ravine.
Ooh, okay, it's getting a little reduced.
Ron pointed with some confidence after
Oh,
a
let's have a
while,
little
and we
taste,
started again.
gamers. Where's my tasting spoon?
I saw his
There
lips
it
utter a
is.
string of profanity, and he motioned that he was hearing more helicopters. This time, I again saw 2 of them going overhead. I couldn't tell what kind they were, but there were no searchlights. It started to
Pretty good.
snow, very lightly.
Gonna add
We
a little
finally
bit
cut a
more
break,
water
though.
so it doesn't burn.
Suddenly, the slowest and smallest part of the Dry Gun River, which ran parallel to the John Adams Trail in this part of the forest, appeared on our left, where according to the map it became Rickendale's Stream, and I felt safer somehow knowing that we were on the right track. The map told us
You know
there
what?
was
I
only
think
one
that's some
direction we
leftover
could
cheese
move
I can
upon
pop in
hitting
there.
it, west. And at some point, the waterbed would become thin enough to cross to the trail. Before we reached that junction, though, there was another frightening sight.
Oh no, that's moldy.
Ron pointed it out. I would have spotted
Let's check
it
out
much sooner,
the second
but
cheese.
for my deafness. A speedboat was moving quickly, too quickly down this woodsy, quiet,
love
and
cheese, but
shallow
sometimes I
portion of
forget
the
about it.
stream where it would have been dangerous
So
to even kayak too quickly.
That
The
cheese is
second
good.
I saw
Here
it,
you
I
go,
pressed
bitch.
myself against
Wah.
a tree, and so did Ron, safely out of sight. There were 2 men in the speedboat, and they never even came close to spotting us because their attention was riveted on the other side of the stream.
Okay.
One was guiding the speedboat while
to it,
dangerously looking through a pair of binoculars,
Oh, my
while the
spine.
other man had one foot on the side of the boat as if he were ready to leap off at any second. He was holding a shotgun. They were intently
Posted
looking
the
for
history
something, most
lesson
likely
on
us.
Tash Art Zone in case it might help.
They
you
were
in
gone
history
quickly. At their rate of speed, an accident
History
was
lesson
bound
for
to
what?
happen. Our morale plummeted
I'm
once
highly,
more.
highly caffeinated. I
Ron
can't
had
remember.
removed his gloves to try
history
to dry
lesson.
them in his back pockets. And even in the growing dark, I could see how discolored his fingers had become. Mine were almost as bad. and the
Oh,
feeling in
oh,
two
like
of them was
background.
fading fast. The snow did not
Excellent.
thicken, thank God, but there was that.
Is that something you'd like me to
awful
go
wind,
over before I do some
consistent,
sillies?
bitter.
Actually, that's good because I
We decided
am
silently to keep
considering
going
some sillies, but I don't know
down
which
the river.
sillies I want to do.
It was as if we had a
let's
mutual
go down to
understanding
Tash,
that we
though.
didn't have the strength or belief in attaining our freedom anymore to improvise. The sky above us had finally
Art
become a
zone.
deep blue when we got the greatest shock so
Oh my
far.
god, why does she have so many
It felt like we were
fucking...
making
okay.
good,
This is
steady
actually
progress,
smart. It's
at
smart she
least,
does this.
walking side by side now, close to each other, trying somehow to feel warm. Our hands were balled into fists against the cold and crossed over our chests, sometimes curled up inside our hats for any kind of extra warmth.
Oh my god.
My ears stung badly every
That
time
is...
the wind
okay.
picked up.
I'm sharing that.
At some point, we raised our heads simultaneously and saw a man walking towards us. He had a dog on a leash.
Small.
We might have walked right past him
Brighter.
if he had been just a little
Silly.
slower to look up.
Bigger. The bigger he is, the more of a
He
friend
was raising
is.
a hand to us.
Determined.
What he was doing out in the gathering dark we didn't know, but his presence told us that the trail was very close, and we'd probably
Anti-aliasing.
reached the outer edge of Lemus.
Oh my god.
Ron and I stopped beside the man so as not to generate any suspicion.
Oh my god.
His dog
Formal
didn't
wear, but
seem
he also has a
interested in
sweater
us.
and tie.
The man,
and
who was about
tie.
50, began speaking right away. He seemed
Mm.
completely unconcerned with our
scrunkly.
decrepit condition, but that would have been
I
less
fucking
obvious
love this
in the dark.
guy.
Ron gestured that I was deaf, which surprised me because it was such an identifier if the man had been watching the news. The man nodded in understanding and explained something to Ron,
thinking.
who listened carefully. They fell into conversation while I could only watch.
What does he like
incredibly
doing the
frustrated.
most, Thermo?
I was about to beckon for the pen and the index cards when Ron took them and wrote for almost a minute, crossing a couple of things out while the man continued to speak. The words Ron labored to
Yeah,
write
got
down
you.
for me, which I had to squint to read in the near dark, were these.
Or what's an activity he can be doing?
Police in the area. Shooting. Telling people
Okay,
to
okay.
stay
Everybody else in
indoors.
chat can speak up as well while you think.
No one knows what's going on. The stranger finally went on his way after seeming to ask what we were doing out here in the woods, to which Ron responded with an explanation of some kind.
Okay, well,
At
what do
one
you
point
like doing?
actually forcing
Fishing.
out a laugh, as if
I
we were
love
just out
snails.
on a lark. I read those words in the index
Ah,
card
my
again
bones.
as we
I'm
watched the
cracking all
man
my
move
bones.
on. Ron consulted the map and pointed out exactly where he thought we were, though it was almost impossible to see anything. We probably had an hour left of walking, maybe less. We were both very confused. Those words, shooting, telling people to stay indoors, made everything not make sense. But there was no time to stand and reevaluate what had come before. We had to move. Somehow I felt confident that the stranger hadn't recognized us. There had been no glimmer of it in what I could see of his face. There were 10 more minutes of brisk walking. At one point we saw distant lights through the trees, which might have meant the edge of a residential neighborhood.
Bone
I
crunching,
wanted so
drinking
badly
tea
to
through
go
a mask
towards
is
them at
fun.
any cost.
Knuckles cracking
They
ASMR.
faded
Here,
at
we got
some
more
point,
too.
though, when the stream curved away from us,
Tea.
and we were embedded in the forest again. The stream then hooked sharply, and we left it entirely for good, hoping the trail would be
We can
just
do a
up
bunch of
ahead.
those, actually. We don't even have
Then
to choose.
Ron and I both slowed down at the same time. I was reacting to him, or so I thought.
What's your favorite
he
kind
might
of
have been
tea?
reacting to me. I had slowed just because of a sense I had about something up ahead. Maybe my senses were becoming heightened because of my racked nerves. I had been eyeing something up ahead, on the left, a large, shadowy form at first, then what was obviously the remains of an abandoned structure of some kind. Even in the dark, we could see right away that it was nothing we had to be concerned about. Years ago, decades, from the look of it, someone had built a large cement foundation
Chai
out
tea.
here in the middle of nowhere and
Apple
then
tea.
never moved
Ooh.
forward with the construction. The foundation cut a hollow into the earth. Rotting cement bricks rose in uneven columns. Some parts of the first floor of the house, or whatever it was, rose as much as 10 feet off the ground, and there were window cutouts in front, while other parts didn't go nearly that high. The bricks were black with moss, crumbling, and graffiti defaced every part of it. Maybe it had been meant to be a shelter or something built by the DNR, or maybe an entrance to the forest had been planned. Ron was on my left, and he almost bumped into me, veering strangely away from the structure, which was about 50 feet away. We stopped and looked at it. My sense that something was wrong was confirmed when Ron suddenly flinched and took a step backwards, touching my arm. I looked at his face, willing him to look at me, but he was staring at that foundation,
Cannabis
not even
tea.
noticing that the trail was visible just beyond it.
He glanced at me briefly and then motioned
little
that he wanted
creamer.
to take a closer look.
You little
Before he took
cinnamon.
another step, he wrote down 3 more quick words on an index card. By now he could barely write. His hands were in such bad shape, and I could just barely make out the words. They said, "Here's something weird." I pointed at the trail, but it was as if he didn't even see me. He wanted to take just a few steps toward that foundation. I hung back, my breathing pluming in front of my face. Ron took 2 steps forward, and then he stopped again. He leaned forward a little and turned his head, cocking it. He was listening to something. But there was certainly
The
nothing moving that I
cruncher.
could see staring through the jagged holes where windows were once planned. He took 1 more step. My heart was racing now. I couldn't believe that he was doing this, that we weren't plowing
this is
past
what
this
he
place
heard.
as fast as we could. But he seemed powerless to break away.
Yeah.
He was frowning, disturbed by what he
Yeah.
was hearing.
That's
And then
what
he
that guy's
flinched
hearing.
again, more drastically this time, because something had quite quickly decided him. His whole body
Kate
shook
makes a
once, just
comeback?
once, like there
Oh,
had
no,
been
that's
a
just my
jolt of
perspective
sound
lens.
nearby that he wasn't
Although, not a
expecting.
bad idea.
He pointed past me and made a motion toward the west, and then he went by me in the blink of an eye and began to move very fast, not quite running toward a part of the trail that required us to ascend a slight slope, instead of getting onto it at a point near that foundation.
I'm thinking about the Yeezys.
I followed, looking behind me, but there was nothing visible in that thing as it diminished in size behind us. Ron waved at me frantically to keep up with him, but again he stopped, just short of a run, trotting instead through the snow, as if he were trying not to panic me or himself. We clambered up the slope and hit the trail, turning to the west. Ron let me catch up a little, throwing a quick look behind him, and made a hand gesture to suggest that we had to keep trotting. I didn't know how much my lungs could take, but something had scared him very badly. My first thought was that he had heard a bear, which were common where we were. Or maybe voices, or he
Oh,
panicked
yeah,
because he
chocolate
thought
caramel
people
and coffee is so
were
good.
there huddled, looking for us.
A
What scared
potion.
me far worse was that Ron never stopped moving at that pace. The wind battered us worse and worse, and during one especially nasty gust, I reached out for his arm and urged him to stop, tapping my chest and shaking my head. Reluctantly, he did so, staring back down the trail into the dark. He let me catch my breath.
Such a good
Then he
setup
reached
for a horror
forward,
story.
grabbed my shoulders, and got his face close to mine to seize my attention. It was then that he physically pushed me forward. I understood at that moment how urgent the situation was, and we started again. This time I made a conscious decision not to look behind me. I would just run.
1, 2, buckle my
In my panic, I actually got a
shoe.
little bit ahead of Ron.
Yes.
I think now that I was trying to show him I understood the situation and I would not let him down, so I led the way, keeping my eyes rooted on the path. I became aware of seemingly random patches on my body which had no feeling at all anymore. A part of my left thigh, a patch of skin on my back. I locked my eyes on the trail so as not to lose it, moving fast, and tried to mentally will my blood to circulate faster to stave off the frostbite. I can't say exactly how long I let us. I slowed only when the wind
You
kicked
got
up,
them the fiddly
bending the
knees.
trees in every direction, and once when my right foot connected painfully with a branch on the ground. I would guess I kept my focus for 5 or 6 minutes, and then the pain in my lungs was just too great.
Knee
I remember
whisper.
looking up into the sky and noticing how quickly full dark had come. Then a pain began to stab me in my side, and I turned to gesture to Ron that I had to slow down. But Ron wasn't there when I turned. He was gone.
He's okay, Chad.
I looked around rapidly left and right, but there was no sign of him. We were in a thick stretch of woods, and visibility had become minimal.
It's just his
The
chin
trail
lowering. Oh my
disappeared
god.
into nothingness.
Magnificent.
I waited no more than 30 seconds, and then I began to backtrack, staring down at the snow and my footprints, the only ones on the trail now. The wind, though, so constant now, was blurring them, and I had to bend closer to the ground just to decipher them. Every time the wind surged, it made it more difficult to track my path. I kept going, but there was no sign of Ron's prints for some time. Finally, I came across an area where everything was lost, and a patch where the snow had been disturbed in several places. I saw a very tiny glow in the snow and bent down to pick up the cell phone that Ron had been carrying. It was freezing cold to the touch, caked in snow, but it was still working.
The rest of his head
At
goes
some
up.
point, I don't know
Oh my
when,
god,
he
cute.
turned it on. Now he was gone. I could see nothing in the trees. We'd been on level ground, so there had been no sudden fall in the dark into a ravine or a depression. I was afraid to make any sound, but I finally cried out for Ron and waited. And waited. I went into the trees on both sides of the trail, but fear kept me from going too deep. I looked for signs that he had been dragged off somehow, but visually it just wasn't possible. It was just too dark and there was too much wind. I cried out just once more. My hands were claws, my fingers losing sensation. My ears and my nose stung painfully. Snow was clinging to my face where the wind had tossed it, and parts of my cheeks had become painful as well. I wanted to turn the cell phone off just to crush its feeble glow because it made me feel visible, exposed. But first I managed to call up the only phone number stored in its memory, and I pressed send. After a moment I saw the word connected appear. Unable from birth to form clear words, I said nothing into the receiver. It was only a desperate attempt to send some sort of communication to the safe house. I cut the call off and turned and headed forward again. As I went, I attempted to send a text message, carefully pressing each letter as I went, trying to navigate while I did so, no longer running. Ron's disappearance made capture seem finally acceptable. I staggered forward, typing out, "Help, 1 mile away." Then I put the phone into my pocket and tried to run again. Having no map, it seemed useless, but I ran anyway until my lungs screamed once again. I saw no lights through the trees, no sign that I was close to anything at all.
I guess I'll finally
Constantly
change.
looking back over my shoulder to see if Ron might appear
This, actually, though.
was like looking into a black tomb. Help did not come. There was no answer to my text message. None.
For the last half
would
an hour
say
of this.
I walked for another full hour, unable to think about anything as the wind pummeled me, before I finally sank to one knee on the trail, squeezing my eyes tight. In my weakened mental state, I decided I would go on for 5 more minutes, just 5 more, counting the seconds in my head as I went. If in 5 minutes I didn't receive a sign that there was hope, if Ron didn't emerge from the dark, or
Eyes
there were
closed?
no
Okay, let's
lights, or at least a weakening of the awful wind,
I
I would lay down and give up. Just go to sleep
Yeah, okay, let's get that in
and
there.
let fate take over. My 5 minutes began, and though I lost track of the seconds, I only counted down about halfway before my miracle happened. Looking up to my right, I saw a ridge through the trees, and the trees grew so thin in their relentless columns that I knew what I was seeing was a break in the forest. I got off the trail and climbed a long, gradual
Sleepy. What would
upslope,
sleepy
slipping
brows look
twice.
like?
When I got to the top,
I'm
the
keeping them
forest
puffy like
simply
this. They gotta be
ended.
puffy.
I was standing at the edge of a long, undulating, snow-covered field. Beyond it, in the distance, was another line of trees that marched to the north and had
The
been carefully
challenge.
planted to separate one section of the field from the next.
I guess they would
This was
kinda be like
farmland.
that.
I saw no houses, no barns, but I walked toward that line of trees, my heart beating fast. It wasn't the safe house I was after, since I had no idea where that might be,
Oh,
but it was a sign of humankind.
let me know. We'll
Past
update
that first row of trees was another, even bigger field, and as soon as I entered it, I saw the shape of a house far away, past a long wooden fence that seemed to run forever. Snow blew into my eyes, but the shape was unmistakable. I just had to make it there, 1 foot in front of the other. As I grew closer, it proved not to be a mirage. It was a small, 1-story house on the edge of someone's property. It sat right on the edge of the forest. I climbed that low wooden fence, and I had made it to the house. The fields that stretched beyond it ran to the horizon, far away. The forest bordered the property to the east, and the house was cut off from any road, all alone. There were no vehicles around, nothing. but the house was in good shape. No lights were on inside.
Free house.
I climbed onto the tiny porch and pounded on the door. There was no answer. That was all right. I would break a window and get inside, and though the house might be vacant or even abandoned, I would be warmer. Maybe there would be food. I turned to my right, to the ground level window. I would have to get off the porch and go around it to get to it. I descended the 3 wooden steps to the frozen ground. At that moment, the wind from the south rose and nearly knocked me over with its force. Dead leaves skittered across the open field, striking my legs. I leaned into the wind. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something above me move. There was something on the roof of the house, something that had been hanging off the edge somewhat, and it was now being pushed off entirely by the wind. The thing, which at first I thought was a bag of grain or charcoal or peat or something, descended and crashed to the snow 10 feet away from me. I walked over to it.
Dinner.
It was a body,
Ooh, dinner.
a man,
Dinner.
dead.
Dinner.
He lay face up on the snow.
Supper.
I would say he was between 50 and 60 years old. Not dressed for the cold, no jacket, no
Absolutely.
gloves, no
Yeah, go
hat.
ahead and use character creator engines.
His eyes were open, staring into the sky. He was
Especially
bald,
like
and
pit
he had a
crews and stuff
heavy
are really
beard.
cool.
His cause of death was obvious
If you're
right away
using
from the
AI
strange
ref, I'd
contortion of his body.
probably say don't, just
He'd
because
been
I
cut
hate
almost in half
AI
myself.
art. But like a pit
I
crew
backed away
that's
from him
like
there.
an artist made that put together.
Before I had
preferred.
seen
If
something
you're really
staining
desperate
the
though, I
snow
won't hold it against you if
nearby,
you
now
have to use
realized
an
it
AI
was
reference. I'll
blood.
keep my
This
opinions
man's
to myself.
blood, which had soaked through the snow in front of the house before he had wound up
But you can
somehow
also
on the edge
describe
of the
and
roof,
I can design it within an hour.
placed there or thrown there somehow. I regarded the silent house, which seemed so empty.
Nah, fuck it. Okay, based.
Paranoid, I then turned to face the fields that rolled
My
away
mom
from
doesn't
it
really
into the
understand
horizon.
the problem with AI yet.
This is the image I will
I
never
haven't sat
forget
down and been like, Mom.
as long as I live.
And so sometimes she'll send me like articles like, oh, this is
stretching
cool. And I'm
gently
like,
upwards
no,
into
Mom.
the distance. A barn, nothing more than a dock.
Yeah, absolutely.
far,
Always use pit crews.
far
I love
away
pit
on
crews.
another property. A line of trees was more than a half-mile away to the west.
I'm going to make these like unapologetically
Brilliant
bad
stars
shoes. Like,
dotted
they're
the
gonna be
colorless night
blocks.
sky. To me, it was all a silent tableau, perfectly peaceful,
Like these might as well be the Mega
like a
Man boots.
painting of a Christmas
not gonna
night
be.
somewhere in the Midwest. And halfway between me and that horizon, something sat in the middle of the field, not more than 100 yards away.
Me.
Something large, the size of a car, I would say.
Reh,
It was too dark to really see it at first, despite the brilliant snow glare.
reh, reh.
But as my eyes locked in on it, I saw details. It was a living thing,
Reh.
a creature.
Hero
curled
Forge is
up
also great.
tightly
Yeah, I
in the
really like
field.
Hero Forge.
It wasn't moving, nor was it dead. I
It's
could
hanging
make
out.
out a very dark body with something surrounding it that looked like a thick tail. As I say,
Okay, I'm going to
the
put the
size
buckles
of a
up here
car.
just because you can get a
the
better
way it was
angle.
curled up, it was so much like the image of a sleeping cat or a dog.
No, we got to be more realistic.
I then spotted something in the woods far beyond it.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
There were little bits of light moving there, incredibly tiny. First just 2, then 4, then many more than that,
Oh, that was spicy. Oh,
Human
because I had
beings.
those noodles. Oh.
each carrying a flashlight. As I stood rooted in place, the thing in the field awoke. I saw it raise its head very slowly, though which direction it was looking in I couldn't tell.
They were
The
Gianni.
head was flat and rectangular. Those flashlights and the people holding them, dozens of them now,
Or
were
maybe
going
they
to
were a
emerge
scary
from the woods at any
monster.
moment. They were maybe 2 football fields away from the thing. As I have said, I was closer. The creature began to move. Its upper body rose further, and what I was looking at was snake-like, but then it unfolded gigantic arms, one on each side of its body, and they stabilized the body by clamping the ground. That was when the head turned slowly towards me. I couldn't make out its actual eyes, but it seemed as if it really had none, just a pair of deep sockets with nothing in them. But that was surely just a trick of the dark in the
Werewolf.
distance. There was a hideous moment where we were connected visually, me and this thing that had crawled or climbed or descended from someplace unknown. But it couldn't have been what Ron had sensed in the forest. It couldn't have been that fast. My last conscious thought was that this was not the only creature roaming the forest that night. The thing's torso, fully extended, rose probably 10 feet off the ground. Given the choice to move toward the people in the woods or move towards me, it chose me. Its lower half began to slither in my direction. Its arms released their tight grip on the earth. I turned and ran onto the porch, and assuming the front door would be locked, threw my weight as hard as I could against it. The door buckled against the frame but did not give.
Doing the
I turned the
DreamWorks
knob
face.
frantically, and yes, it was locked. I shoved my numb right fist through the window pane above the knob and felt bones break. I switched hands, flailing about with my left until I could turn the knob from inside and open the door. I remember pushing it inwards. I remember the darkness inside and seeing a pair of boots on a wooden floor.
Sorry, I love this.
Then I dared to turn my head one last time.
Yeah.
The creature had covered almost that entire distance and was perhaps 20 yards away from the porch. Its black body was fully extended as it slithered over the snow. I saw it for 1 second, and then I was inside that house. And that is absolutely the last thing I remember. The trauma of whatever happened next is buried somewhere deep in my mind. The doctors don't think
Do
it will
like
ever
how you
come
form
for me,
these.
even in my dreams. They think I'm safe from ever remembering what I experienced in the seconds after I got into the farmhouse. But they don't know for sure. I was not returned to Grosvenor Penitentiary. I live now in Constantine Hospital in the state of Ohio. I was moved here for a time because it has special facilities for physically handicapped prisoners. I lost an arm and a leg that night. In addition, 3 toes on my left foot were taken by frostbite. No one's ever told me how they saved my life. I told them not to tell me anything. When I awoke in the hospital 2 days after the attack, one of the policemen brought me a pen and a piece of paper and asked if I could try to describe what I remembered of the thing that had come for me. My hands were still being treated for frostbite, which would have made writing difficult enough. Making it almost impossible was that I had retreated so deeply
Ohio.
into my own mind for protection from my memories that I didn't even fully understand where or even who I was.
Oh no, I drew him
Apparently,
almost
I
a
took
little
the
too
pen, and
earnest. This
before
was
I
supposed to be
slipped
looking a
into
lot
unconsciousness
funnier
again,
and ironic,
was able
but
to
I have
scrawl only a
unironically made
single jagged word,
the cool Yeezy
and
pose.
that word
Oh well.
was claws.
Claws.
Yeah, that was really scary. It's too bad I talked over that whole ravioliation. Probably get a little bit of color on this too. Okay, we'll still give him a little bow tie. Or no, he won't. Oh, yeah, give me that. Oh, hell yeah.
Banky.
Yeah. Actually, I think I can keep that. I think I might change these parts of the eyes when I go to color, actually. I guess. Personally, I would have confidently walked up to the beast. Confidence is literally everything. So... okay, next one. I really like one about, it's like travel. Blah, 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 blah. Mm. Still thinking. Is this the one I'm thinking of?
She'd lapse into a silence and a loose wire.
No, it's not. We have to get the right one, folks. We can't just listen to a regular one. We have to listen to one that I really like. We're gonna find it. Gamers. Gamers. Oh, fuck it. This one's good.
My name is Samuel
They're all
Pollan.
good. Just some of them I like.
I'm
more
a
than
teacher
others.
of the deaf in Washington, D.C. I am 46 years old.
Bloodborne.
I've had a good life and will always count my blessings. But 4 weeks ago, I experienced an
Pet the
awful
beast.
trauma brought on
You're
by
allowed
nothing
to
more than seeing a
platonically
certain
pet the beast. You
classified
don't
ad
have
in
to
the
lay the
Washington Post of
beast.
Thursday,
But if you do
November
choose to
5,
do that,
2005.
good for you. And nice.
Since then, I've been fighting depression and insomnia
Shit, dude.
as I try to let go of one single hour nearly 20 years in the past.
Oh, shit, dude.
The classified ad, which drew me back through the years, was a call for anyone who had been riding on the Metro rail system on the night of April 12, 1988, between 11 p.m. and midnight, and witnessed anything strange, to meet at the Petworth Library on Kansas Avenue in the city on a Wednesday night. The ad did not mention any specific incident or accident, as was usually the custom in the Post when people posted ads looking for witnesses to testify in court.
I'm copying that one very specific.
More unusual
Spider-Man
still was that
picture.
the person who placed the ad was looking for witnesses to
Of him
remember a
eating a
night
donut.
17 years in the past. After 3 days of deliberation, I gathered my resolve and showed up at the library on the appointed night. I found 2 people sitting in a small community room. Even though 17 years had passed since I first saw them, and I was only in their company back then for 1 hour, I recognized them instantly. Ellen Vinterberg, who lived in Old Town Alexandria, was now 49 years old. She was the one who had placed the ad, and summoned fellow Metro riders with long memories. She had set up the meeting only after a year's worth of sudden awful dreams
is
had
a
almost proven to her
crunchy-
beyond a
crunchy
doubt
audio.
that what she had seen within the Metro system on the night of April 12, 1988 had not been an illusion. She needed other people to confirm it. She'd been able to bury that night in her subconscious for almost 2 decades, but then, during a brief power failure inside a metro station,
Beast.
the previous February, it had all
Me when I'm
come
a
back to
beast.
her. As it turned out, the only 2 people who had been in her train car in 1988 managed to come to the meeting. Donna Miller was the name of the other woman who'd been on the train, which had been moving north along the red line at night. We sat in the library and dredged up our memories until the library closed. And then we went our separate ways once again. I will never see them again, and that's all right. The thing to keep in mind as I write this down for whoever will read it is that April 12, 1988, precisely marked the 14th anniversary of a trench collapse that killed 4 Metro rail workers in 1974. Few people remember it. It happened during the construction of the Red Line, nearly 2 years before the system officially opened. The cave-in occurred between Judiciary Square and Union Station during heavy rains in early spring of that year.
Pet
These rains
the
caused
beast, or the
unexpected
nightmare
flooding
will.
and a
Whoop!
weakening of supports in the half-excavated
I can't say that in
tunnels
chat
below
now that I'm
Washington
putting these on
surface.
YouTube.
A trench buckled in, and 4 workers laying tracks were instantly buried. It took 12 hours to recover their bodies, and construction was shut down for 9 days. I was 16 years old when this happened, and 30 in 1988. On April 12 of that year, I
VOD
walked
channel.
with a friend from Adams
Perennial
Morgan to a
astro- I
birthday
actually- I
party at
cannot
about
remember.
10 o'clock p.m. And walking past St. Margaret's Church on T Street, we saw there were a few people with candles standing in the circle on the steps. And my friend had to
It is
tell me
nothing special.
it was the anniversary
Perennial
of the
astronaut
Metro
stream
cave-in.
archive. Let me pop it in here.
and that maybe we were seeing the families
Not
of the
allowed to
workers
say,
who had died.
"Come on and
He'd seen them
slam."
gather on that day twice before.
No, your phone died.
I thought of how sad that was.
Actual fascism.
that
Yeah,
these
that's right.
people were still doing this after so
I'm
many
like
years.
I'm like the.
I
the
came back
Hitler
from the
of saying
party
you
alone.
can't say come.
and I had to run to get the last train of the night. I just barely caught it. I had maybe one drink at the party just to be social, and I think that the alcohol was probably completely gone from my system by the time I got on the train.
Got an
There were
archive?
2 other
Thank
people
you.
in my car,
Congrats.
both of them women.
Thank you.
I started to nod off a little bit as soon as we pulled out of DuPont Circle Station,
What
but
was
I
my
was
other
pretty
funny
aware of everything
idea?
that was going on. The train started to have trouble somewhere around
Is
Metro
that the
Center.
child in
Just
the
stopping
hallway,
and
or is that
starting, the
Gianni?
usual
I don't know
thing.
if you guys heard that.
The lights flickered as we pulled into Judiciary Square, but that wasn't strange either. We hit the big problem about a minute after we left that station. The train stopped, and it just sat there. There wasn't any announcement about it at all. And after 5 minutes or so, I think we were
Okay,
kind
that
of
one's
expecting one. We were in a tunnel, and usually they at least made people feel a little better about things by coming over the PA system and apologizing and saying we'd be moving shortly. But there wasn't even any of that. At about the 10-minute mark, the woman on the farthest end of the car from me got up and started pacing and shaking her head. She seemed really nervous. I didn't blame her. I'd never been on a stopped train that long before. I was completely awake by then, because of anger mostly. The woman's pacing covered more and more area until she was doing almost the whole car. She looked at me at one point and said, "I'm kind of claustrophobic." I just nodded and said something useless. Maybe 30 seconds after she said that to me, the lights went out. She let out a little shriek. The emergency light stayed on at least, but now it was bad. The lights were out, and we were in a tunnel, and no one was telling us anything.
Yeah, it's fine.
I could sort of see the train car in front of us through the connecting door on the far end, and their lights were out too. It wasn't just us. There weren't many people in that one either that I could see. The pacing woman tried to sit down, but she just couldn't. She finally pressed the button to speak to the conductor, but all she got was a little bit of static. It wasn't working. And I thought,
Thigh
this is
gap.
now as bad
Legendary
as it can
thermo
get.
thigh gap.
We were underground in a tunnel, cut off. When the emergency lights went out, I admit I almost panicked myself. Suddenly there was a click, and we were in total darkness. I got a really bad jolt of adrenaline through me. The woman cried out again, and I yelled out, it's okay, but it certainly wasn't. It was ridiculous. I was truly scared.
Vagnon.
The other woman in the car,
Send
the
a
one who had
message.
stayed seated and tried
No.
to read her book, said,
I
"What is
hate talking
this?"
to people. No,
I said I just didn't know.
talking to people is anathema. Don't
the
you
pacing
know that?
woman said, oh God, we're stuck
Talking
here,
to people
we're
makes me
stuck
want to
here."
hurl.
And she yelled out for someone to say something. Just keep saying something. We
Although
couldn't
you
see
can
anything
clip
at
this
all.
and say, I'll say
It was
hi.
total darkness, as if our eyes
Big
had been shut
vagina.
tight.
Oh, convened with an elva.
So I started a little
oh.
patter, something meaningless.
It's that
And
kind
I
of
got up
name.
and walked toward where I thought she was. She was so scared that she sensed my voice getting near, and she said, "Get back, please." as if she thought I was going to attack her. The other woman told her it was all fine, that we were very close to Union Station, and the worst that could happen was that we could walk to it using the lights inside the tunnel.
I just love making these
Even that
boots.
wasn't
Like,
really
you draw
true,
these
I
boots
don't think.
better than I do.
I
I
didn't see
love
any
drawing
lights
these
at
boots
all.
badly.
It was like being in a closet or a tomb. Just darkness. Years before, I had gone on a tour of some underground caves out near Boonesboro, and the guide shut off his flashlight for a minute and let it all sink in. How deep we were in the earth. And this was like that. You just can't take it for very long. We tried to get a little conversation going. We stopped when we saw some weak lights come out outside the car, but this was the first bizarre thing. Truly bizarre. Emergency lights had come on in a car behind us, but I knew for an absolute fact that we were in the last car in the chain, because I always got on the last car, since it was always the quietest. And when the lights had first begun to flicker, I recall distinctly looking back through the rear window at the tunnel disappearing behind us. But now somehow there was a car chained to our rear, and its emergency
Okay, that
lights
was really
were on.
scary.
I still couldn't see much of anything because those lights
How
were
dare
dim,
someone knock on my
and they had
door?
no real color either. I got up from where I was, which was a seat in the middle
Spaniards
of the
will
car,
die laughing when people say
and I navigated
El
my way toward the
Vagnon.
back. I told the pacing woman that she should come back too, because the
It
light
sounds
would
like a
make her
French
feel
city.
better. And if she wanted, we could even open the door and cross into that car.
Okay, I'm gonna look outside.
But she said no. I saw many more details of the car behind us as I got closer. It was all wrong. Instead of being filled with seats like
Okay,
our
there's no
car,
one out there. There's no
it was like a
spooky
freight
ghost.
car filled with what looked like
It was just
dirt.
someone knock. It was probably just an
Literally
Amazon
filled
delivery.
with dirt all the way back, and
That's
if you were
really-
standing in that car, the dirt would have
Aren't
come
they
up to
French
your chest.
cereal of some kind? I don't
There were
know.
poles in
I
it,
ain't
and
French.
signs and advertisements, just like any normal car. The seats had just been buried completely. It was the most insane thing I had ever seen. I thought I was hallucinating.
That's
Then I heard the
that was
pacing
so
woman far
scary.
behind me. She was saying, "What's wrong with that car? What's wrong with that car?" in a very panicky voice.
She was freaking out, bro.
I said everything was fine.
It's fine.
I don't know what I meant. It was just something to say.
I actually like this narrator. I like
pressed
this
my
kind of
face as
deadpan.
close to the rear door of our car as I could, against the window looking back. My mind was completely spinning. I was terrified. There was no way I could be seeing what I was seeing.
I have to make this face
Then
more
a little
smug.
bit of movement caught my eye. And I saw that inside the car, half full of dirt, more dirt was
Five
actually
Nights at
sifting down
Giannis,
from its
literally.
ceiling onto the accumulation. Sifting down from 2 different spots inside that car. If the pacing woman had seen that, she would have panicked. So I didn't say anything. I heard her say that she was going to close her eyes and lie down on the floor,
Based.
and I called back to her. I said that was a good idea. The other woman said nothing. I wasn't even sure where she was. It was unmistakable
I wanted
that
to make
dirt
this
was
one look
sifting
slightly
down in
more
2
pathetic.
controlled little sheets from the
let's
ceiling
quickly
of the car
hash it
behind
out, and
us.
then we can get some color on this.
I kept looking, trying to make
Let's
things out.
exaggerate the shoulders.
That was when the lights came on full blast in that car. They stayed that way for maybe 8 or 9 seconds, tops. But in that time, I saw things sticking out of the dirt. One of them was a hand, a human hand buried up to the wrist.
Flyboard. Hello.
The other thing I saw, I swear to it, was a man's head and half of one of his shoulders. His head was turned away from me, cocked to one side as if he were listening to something in the dirt.
There's something in the dirt.
On top of the head was a white construction helmet. It didn't move.
This is pretty funny, but let's just...
I want to say there was blood on the man's neck, but I can't be sure there was. I just knew he was dead.
Excuse you.
Just before the lights in that car went out for good, the pacing woman screamed behind me, maybe 15 feet behind me. She hadn't laid down after all. She had decided to creep through the dark to see the car behind us for herself, and she saw what I saw. Her screaming hadn't really even stopped when the lights in our car came on. Well, at the exact same moment, the lights in the one behind us went off entirely. I stood up and saw the woman's eyes, totally wide, her hand clamped
Oh,
over her
I know.
mouth. The other woman had stood up too, and was well behind her. Both of them were looking over my shoulder. Our car jerked a little, and it started moving. I almost fell and grabbed the pole closest to me, and then I looked behind us again. Through the windows, you could just see tunnel.
No, it's not as funny.
There was no car there, connected to ours. There never had been. We started moving at full speed, and in about 2 minutes we were at Union Station. I remember one man got on there. He walked
Hey,
past
I
the
really
three of
know.
us and
No.
took a seat.
No, actually, this is a
He
different
had
voice
no idea
actor
what
from
had
the
happened.
author.
The three of us were all sitting kind of close together, then looking at each other. The
It is very
panicky-pacing
deadpan,
woman,
which again I kind of like because this guy
who I
sounds
would
like
know
a
later
jobber.
as Ellen Vinterberg, got
in
off at
character.
Union Station, though it was obvious that wasn't where she was headed. She just had to get off the train. I didn't know whether to follow her. She still had her hand over her mouth, and she had started to cry when she bolted out the door. She walked quickly toward the station exit. Her head was down. That left just me and the other woman, whose name I now know was Donna Miller. As the train pulled away from Union Station, she asked me, "Did you see the hand?" And I nodded. We just sat there for 2 more stops. We didn't say anything at all. Finally, when Rhode Island Avenue came up, she stood up, getting ready to go. She said to me, "I don't want to think about it. Maybe tomorrow, but not now." I didn't know what to say.
When you had a long day at work and you
She
just
got
don't
off
have
the
time for
train,
the paranormal horrors.
And I was basically alone. I got up and walked to the front of the car where there were a couple of other people, and I sat there near them. Even so, I got off at Tacoma Park, 2 stops too soon. And I left the station and got a cab home. I didn't sleep at all.
This is anti-transit propaganda.
Since the meeting at the library, where all of us visibly trembled remembering what we had seen on the night of the anniversary of the trench collapse, I have dreams about it constantly. The dreams end in all sorts of different ways, but usually the car that the three of us are in starts to crack at the ceiling, and dirt comes sifting through, and we beat at the windows until we can't breathe anymore.
Oh, it's just a bit
I
of
feel myself getting
skill
covered
issue.
by dirt, and I hear it bouncing off a construction helmet I'm wearing. I keep trying to scream, but my mouth fills up. Sometimes in the dreams, I know I'm about to suffocate, and I reach a hand up to grab anything I can.
Colors from the Minecraft one are more accurate.
And I know that my hand will be frozen like that after I die, clasping above the dirt.
Even there's dirt.
Ellen Vinterberg, who had been most affected by what we saw, died last night. She had apparently been severely depressed for months, though no one but myself and Donna Miller truly understood why. She committed suicide by jumping in front of an underground metro train halfway between Judiciary Square and Union Station at about 10 p.m.
Rough.
The Post says it is the only known case of a person who is not a Metro employee dying inside the train tunnels. To get to where her body was found, she would have to have either stepped out of the rear door of a stopped train car and climbed down the tracks unseen, or walked through the dark from either station until she was fatally struck. The same fate will not happen to me, I'm sure of it. Though the dreams of the Metro continued to possess me, I'm stronger than she was. After all, it was
Guys,
I who went forward to
see
see
a
what was inside that
therapist.
other train car while she cowered in the dark.
oh, okay.
I will be as brave as I can be,
So he's okay.
and from now on I will avoid the subway
I see
system,
what they're going for.
as long as it takes to bury
He's
the
just built
past for
different.
good.
Huh. Me at all these people with their problems. Why don't they seek therapy? Checkmate. I would survive any horror scenario. Get his ass. Well, thanks for dropping by, Cosmic. Be good. Maybe I'll join you later. Wake up and smell the Disappointment. That is fantastic. Banger.
Blanket. 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 Cozy.
It has only just gotten cool enough in this apartment for me to wear my cozy blanky house coat. I don't ever use it because it's a small mug and I need at least 16 ounces. Maybe it's directed at the world, like, wake up and smell the disappointment of the world. The beauty of it is it can be read many different ways. The Minecraft one's more accurate. Oh, that is brown. Okay. I'm going to make that slightly less saturated and a little bit brighter. Little bit brighter. There we go. I'll just put on some music while we wrap this up. But yeah, we've been listening to Knife Point Horror. I like it. It's good stuff. It's got a decent amount of episodes since like going back to like 2012. Some of them are in like short story collections, which is I'm sure why I can't find some of the episodes that I'd like to listen to. Oh. Nope. Oof. Oh my god. Yeah, okay, you put the scratchy audio on it. Just give me some synthwave. I like keeping that off screen a little bit. There we go. Wake up and smell the chaos! Yeah. Oh my goodness. 5 o'clock already? Oh, I gotta do a little bit of studying tonight, finish some commission work. Study. And get a good night's sleep for tomorrow. What I really want to do is just play Elden Ring. We've been going through another playthrough with the co-op mod. My brother and I. And it's going great. Although I think I need a better... I need a better controller, guys. It's not that I'm bad at it. It's just I need a better controller. And ironically, though, it's got, like, kind of some delay issues.
Elden Ring.
Whoa. I was gonna ask who that was. I was like trying to embody SpongeBob, and I was like, nah, I'll just make it it's my new pink OC. Pink guy. Anyone you can think of who would appreciate the
1, 2, buckle my shoe.
That's not what T reflections look like. Ah, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. First of all, it should be reflecting the environment. Should be lighter golden color. Very important to get the photorealistic T right. There.
Le biscuit. Donald.
He looks like an eagle. I'm gonna pull up the Spider-Man eating donut. Ugh. True horror. Oh, it's an onion ring. Saturating it a little bit. There we go. And now for his final move. Oh wait, he's wearing suspenders. I forgot. How could I forget? Alright, let's get a little bit of shading here. Put a little multiply layer. Holy shit. Hell yeah, this is fucking. Yeah. Very nice. How do you pronounce Marika? Yeah. Yeah. I had, when I was working at a grocery store, my friend Oscar came over to me and he's like, so your name's Marika, right? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, because in my language, it means, lesbian. And I'm like, oh! He just said lesbian. I'm assuming it's a little bit more offensive than that. But yeah, it's... I don't know how close the Marika is to, that particular word. It's also pronounced like a million different ways. The Dutch one is like Marijke, so I don't know if that's even more. By mispronouncing it. Cursed. Oh yeah, Osric. I'm here to violate YouTube's terms of service. We've already been doing that. What the hell is that? Donut or bagel? I'm thinking donut. I think in the original Spider-Man image, it's onion ring. Wait, I gotta get like the mouth curve right. Alright, sorry. It's just so funny. Spider-Man eat onion ring. Thermo eat onion ring. Mary K. Yep. So you can only say your name if you're gay. Oh, dude, onion ring! Yeah, me too. Has he ruined or enhanced onion rings for us? I think that's what we have to ask ourselves as a society. Germ. Alright, let's get a little bit of a swing. a little bit of a swing, and then I'll call it for today. I gotta do a little bit more off-site, not off-site, off-topic commission work, and that's last little bit of lifeguard studying to do. Gosh, I hope I pass that test. Pray for me, folks. I'm going to be in the water for another 8 hours or so, and it's actually going to be in the water and working rather than being in the water and staring up at my instructor going, oh. Gosh. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love the Corax version. It's so good. I like the other videos Corax has been doing. He's been expanding into talking about games. He's got like such a nice voice. I like listening to it. Okay, one more second making this a little bit more sardonic. Enhance. Oh yeah. Alright. Johnny Ring! It's so good. I love going through every single frame and admiring that one. Sometimes I'll just put it on just to be like, I need my little dopamine hit in the morning. Instead of a cup of coffee, I put on Corax's Onion Ring video, and I'm just like, what a good animator. What a good animator, and what like a weird little guy he's got as like an avatar. Living painting. Oh, the Michelangelo, Leonardo, Da Vinci. I remain. I also like the Life is Pain one. Or is that what you mean, the living painting one? Like Life is Pain, that bit. Roblox Squidward, yeah! Leonardo and Da Vinci, two completely different guys. I don't expect German to be intelligent. I expect him to dance around and be my funny little monkey man. You should. Dabble in a little bit of animation. It's fun. Learn some of the basics in animation while you do it, or not. Just have fun. Yeah. Okay, knock on wood on that one, because even a circle can be hard. But yeah, start small, mess around, you might find you like it, and if you don't, who cares? You learned something new, you learned a new skill, even if you didn't like doing it. That was kind of me with animation. I did a lot of it, but I was like, well, a lot of personal work at least, and I was like, I don't know if I really like doing this as a consistent job. It's fun as like a bit for me. I'm very like, I want this done right now. There we go, an epic cool shadow. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up. Get a little bit more work done. Stir my bolognese. I think I signed the other one wrong. I put like a space between. It's supposed to be like I put another downward dash for the K instead of connecting it to the M. I'm not even consistent. It'll be a scrunkly that's not supposed to look good. Banger. I need to piss. Have a good day. Based. And you know what? With that, we will call it a day. Thank you everybody for popping out. Commissioners, I'll be wrapping these up and sending them to you a little bit later in the evening after I'm done all my other stuff. Thank you very much. I'll possibly see you on Monday. I might dial it back a little bit again and just do like 1 or 2 of these streams next week. They're fun, but I have some other stuff I have to catch up on. I've got a character concept I have to get done for somebody. If I put you in a meat grinder, the only thing to come up is an eyeball. Such a good bit. All right. Everybody, be good, have fun. That's why I pay you to make highly detailed pieces of art that make you do something adjacent to frame-by-frame animation. Exactly, Osri gets it. It's far enough removed. It's perfect. And thank you for popping in. All right, I'm out. How do I close this stream? Oh god, I don't know how to disengage. We have to be streaming for the rest of my life, folks.